खुदा Aurano Auro Mazdae Gam Rue Narem Ashanem Yarato Asha Zertustre Wasnao Kia Vistasto Varvana Farshosta Jamaspa Avashno Kasi Saroj Shashar Ashanam Ta Narenasha Takascha Mazdiasnami. Of what fate are the waters? Of what fate are the trees? Of what fate the bounteous Mother Earth? Of what fate Aura Mazda? Of what fate was Zarathustra? Of what fate and of that law as well? A Mazda worshipper am I. Sisters and brothers, it is my pleasure and privilege to address this august audience on this important topic of the day, climate change. The above verses were recited by Zarathustra, also known as and articulated by Greeks as Zoroaster, the prophet priest of the world's oldest rival religion. Zarathustra expressed his teachings in poetic verses, gathas. And this is what I said is from gathas from Yasna 12.7. Zarathustra recognizes Aura Mazda, meaning the wise Lord, as the creator of the entire universe, the one who laid down paths for sun and stars, who made the moon to wax and wane, who holds the earth and sky apart, who keeps the waters and the plants in place, who fashioned the realms of light and dark, and who created the dawn and day and night. This is also from Gathas, Yasna 44.26. Professor John Hennels, the founding head for the new Department of Study of Religions at the School of Oriental and African Studies at University of London, has described Zoroastrianism as the world's first ecologically conscious religion. He further states, their moral values and daily practices have changed but little over millennia and continents. Foremost is the duty to care for the good creation, humanity, the physical and animal worlds. Veneration of the elements of nature, fire, the sun and sky, the waters and the earth, and promoting a mutually beneficial existence with all of these, Aura Mazda's creations, is essential to Zarathustra's teachings. This gives the Zoroastrian religion added relevance to our modern ecologically conscious times. The religion of Zarathustra holds nature and all of Aura Mazda's creations sacred and entrusts man with their stewardship. It stresses the harmony of both the Minok, which is spiritual, and Getic, which is material aspects of creation, providing a holistic approach to life. So there is retributions for those who do not promote Asha, as is written in Zoroastrian scriptures. Whoever proves himself better than the good and helps creation on its upward march, through Mazda's strength, our master he becomes. But whoever fosters not our Mother Earth behaves far worse than any of the bad and the bad. He meets his retribution at the end. This is from Yasna 51.6. Zoroastrian theology and rituals celebrate and nurture all life. Reverence, care, and compassion for the earth and all its creations are inculcated through the theology of the Amesha Spentas. At the basis of many ancient Zoroastrian purity laws, many of which can now be viewed as sensible and practical hygiene rules, is an intense passion for taking care of all of God's material creations and ensuring that they are not defiled or polluted. Prayers and rituals are offered not for appeasement, but in the spirit of an embracing respect for nature and man's place therein. Environmental preservation and protection are not the monopoly of Zoroastrian faith. All non-faith traditions respect and revere the elements of nature and have taken steps for the promotion and disaster risk reduction, adaptation, low carbon development, climate change education, curbing their own consumption practices, and reducing the use of fossil fuels. Pope Francis, in his Laudato Si, says, every person who lives in this world have to say our common house. Have to say that our common house is burning due to excessively consumerist economics and social model of our world. As faith leaders, we must pledge to raise consciousness and encourage our communities to consider such measures with urgency. Climate change, despite being an environmental issue, significantly impacts the most vulnerable segments of our society, making climate change a spiritual and humanitarian crisis as well. It is important for people of all faiths to be aware and prepared to address and plan for such eventualities, first within the community and then for the community of the human brotherhood. This is our moral responsibility. The most important issue facing our humanity today can't be overstated enough by the two words, climate change. Ever since the first well-researched document on the ecological crisis, the historical roots of our ecological crisis by L. White, ever since that book was published in 1967, our planet has gone from bad to worse. There are plenty of national and international reports full of statistics and warnings of doomsday, so I will not repeat them here. The advanced developed world has exploited all they can and is now trying to find band-aid approaches to correct or reverse the situation. Consider the impact of industrial, agricultural, and other uncontrolled expansion in the developing countries, including its impact on vulnerable populations, water, security, land use, and the politics of energy. There is a time bomb ticking on the hands of humanity today. According to experts and scientists in yesteryears, some of the worst case scenarios could have been avoided by acting swiftly and decisively at every level of the decision-making process, by educating communities of the importance of reducing carbon emissions, encouraging fuel conservation, and the search for energy-efficient alternative fuel sources. The central policy focus was on reaching net zero emission by 2050, based on projections that this would limit maximum warming to an increase in the global average surface temperature of 1.5 degrees centigrade. Determination of the best practices and acceptance of recommended international standards of behavior recommended and accepted at COP16 would have helped. But the nation states, United Nations agencies, businesses, NGO, etc., kept on discussing the issues more than taking bold actions. They took small steps to stop the blast of the time bomb, hoping that we have more time. And so at COP26 in Scotland, nation states came back with extended dates of net zero from 2050 to 2060 and 2070 with certain conditional requirements. The world today is experiencing the results of those non-bold actions by the extreme environmental episodes that the world is expecting, and such as the melting of ice at the poles, heavy rains, flooding, excessive heat, forest fires, dwindling supply of drinkable water, crop failures, etc. So it is important that each nation state clearly identifies the net zero goals along with annual actions they will take to achieve those goals. United Nations agencies like IPCC take a firm stand on transparent accountability of the nation states. The same sort of accountability should be applied to the businesses and industrial sectors as well. But would they be willing to accept this? Due diligence analyses are either not conducted or their findings are ignored. In the meantime, climate change continues at a pace that is much faster than the timescales of the planned actions promised by the nation states. This mistake is putting the well-being of mankind at a very serious risk. And these measures are to limit global warming to a peak of 1.5 centigrade by 2070. But the world faces unavoidable multiple climate hazards over the next 2 decades, with global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and even temporarily exceeding this warning level would mean that additional severe impacts, some of which will be irreversible, according to a report issued in February 2022 by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. The 2021 report card issued by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration made clear that the weather patterns in the Arctic would progressively change from snow to rain as the ongoing temperature change increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The internationally authored report by over 100 scientific experts brought attention to the fact that the current temperatures increase to 1.35 Celsius, which is derived from an average of last 10 years. Rain had occurred on the summit of Greenland for 3 days in August 2021. The rain delivered an energy equivalent to approximately 31,500 Hiroshima bombs and resulted in the melting 7 times faster than normal. In any other spheres of human activity, a warning of catastrophic risks from the most august international expert body would undoubtedly engender an immediate and effective response. With respect to the warnings of the severity of climate change, this is presently far from the case. Instead, we continue to talk about converting fossil fuel power businesses, energy, and transportation to alternative clean energy. For example, to replace the existing 1.4 billion motor vehicles, it will take 15 years. But the EV sales in 2021 was only 6.6 million. So it will take 160 plus years, 160 plus years to convert the world's current fleet. Further, with respect to planting more trees, due to associated microbial activity, early stage growth emits more carbon dioxide than is taken up, and it takes 20 to 30 years for significant carbon dioxide sequestration to begin for many trees. So though planting trees is essential for the long term, but it will not address the near-term challenge. Growing of mangroves could be an excellent potential. However, sadly, one must keep in mind that the temperature and salinity of the seawater is constantly changing and hence not conducive to many mangrove growing projects all over the world. This will further get affected with the Arctic and Antarctic ice melts, which in turn will change the ecosystems of our seas and oceans rapidly. The issue is not simply the problem of heads of state, but also of common man. In order to bring about an urgent response to this issue, We have to reach out to members of our faith and local communities to educate them of the causes of climate change and the ill effects on humanity, nature, our planet, as well as the future generations. Simply hearing news briefs and then going on with our usual lives does not serve the purpose. We have to continue to discuss this issue and emphasize that the future of our planet and the survival of mankind depends on the actions of each individual. We could help provide ideas to our community members on how they could also contribute towards helping to combat this issue. Drive less and carpool or take public transport whenever possible, conserve water, generate less waste, be conscious consumers, and most important of all, reach out to our representatives to demand quick action by our leaders. The overarching problem is that none of these initiatives of carbon drawn upon can now stop us from going over the cliff, unless and most importantly, it is in tandem with inventions to refreeze the Arctic and Antarctic. About addressing climate change, the transition to a new renewable energy-based paradigm is the greatest economic opportunity of all time. It is abundantly clear that most of the current and future economic activity is dependent on the environment and the issue of the climate. Humans are the only species that has evolved in the history of the planet that can control the environment and ensure that it remains well suited for continued prosperity. And yet, as matters stand, the world community remains on a path that is doing the exact opposite. The evidence is overwhelming that much more must be done to ensure the stability and sustainability of both the global economy and the natural environment that is world's primary asset. The overarching question is, when are we going to organize to ensure that we will succeed and create a world where everyone thrives? Because failure is not an option. And I would like to close my thoughts with the following. The water which my grandfather drank from a river, my father drank from a well. We used to drink water from the tap, but our children now drink it from a bottle. From where will our grandchildren and great-grandchildren drink it? From capsules? If we continue to ignore our responsibility to protect our planet and to take action to slow down and reverse climate change, I fear that the only water our descendants shall see will be their tears. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Homi Gandhi, for your talk. Very inspiring, and I'm sure people have some comments or questions for you. You're joining us from Los Angeles, I believe, are you?
I am, and it's about 6 o'clock, coming up to 6 o'clock in the morning. Sun is rising, and I'm seeing the beautiful clouds and the sun coming out.
Thank you for getting up. And you have a water shortage in Los Angeles, I believe. I hope that's going to be, have you noticed, I mean, this is the first question, have you noticed climate change in California? I mean, there've been forest fires, haven't there? Near Los Angeles even.
Yes, it is devastating, really. I mean, people don't realize it. People who live in big houses and those who are fortunate enough to splurge, I guess probably are unfortunate to splurge, they don't notice it. It's the people who will be affected are the poor people. Forest fires, the flooding which is taking place is just indescribable. The weather has changed. Yesterday it was 95 degrees in Los Angeles, where I am. And I'm in a very good area, not far away from Pacific Ocean, about 3 miles as the crow flies. And there is always breeze. I can walk anytime during the day. I mean, and the sun is shining, sun is beautiful. But the people who are in the other parts of California, in the inside, they find 135 degrees in some of the places, which has been high. In the north, there has been quite a lot of devastation by the forest fires. Even in Los Angeles, as you said, forest fires in the certain parts, further up in the southeast, even southeast part of the Los Angeles. So it's indescribable. The whole effect which is taking place today, the whole of northeast and central part of America is going to be, I mean, having temperatures running into 40 Celsius in some of the places.
Oh dear.
I mean, this is undescribable.
Sure. Okay, any other questions for Homi whilst we've got him here? Now's the chance. You didn't say much about the high-level meeting at the UN, the Multilateralism Forum. Are they having an interfaith meeting? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I think people, nation states have realized it, but they are realizing it slowly. At the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the nation states said that it is very essential that we work on it. But as the nation states work slowly, the United Nations Secretary General finally decided that these are the areas on which, and the pandemic really influenced it more by finding out that if we don't work together, it's going to be very difficult. So he appointed a high-level advisory body in which not only nation states have been involved, but businesses, NGOs, and even the faiths, multi-faiths are involved. And they are having regular meetings. If you see the number of people who are on the advisory committee board, it's being led by the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister of Sweden and former President of Liberia, the one who won the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago. It consists of 7 women and 6 men. So they are in majority. Women are even taken into account. There are youth members also. So the next generation has been taken into account. And they are having various meetings with various sectors. There is going to be a meeting on 30th this month for multi-faith being invited to discuss them with this high-level advisory board, and I've been invited to suggest alternatives and excuse me, what are the steps immediately which can be taken. They all will be discussed with various groups. Multi-faith is one of the groups, and finally they will make suggestions in the next year. United Nations meeting, all those suggestions will be taken, and nation states will be asked to take actions.
Right. Okay. Well, that's very heartening to hear, and I hope the meetings go well. Thanks for doing this. And you know, you're on the board of the World Intellectual Forum, so you can feed back to us what's learned. I think there's a role for intellectuals in, as I say, the joined upness of these problems, and we need to get our act together too. So thank you. We'll move on to our next speaker now, who's speaking from Scotland.
Excuse me, I have to leave because I'm offering a prayer for peace with the World Council today. So I if you have any questions, you may ask now.
Yeah, I have only one question for Dr. Homi Gandhi. Are the people aware in your around, it doesn't matter if in America or everywhere else, aware about the fact that one single hamburger, it costs 600-liter water that we are giving to the grain and to the beast before to bring an hamburger in our meat, the equivalent of 2 months of shower. Is people aware about it?
Good question.
See, awareness is something just in Zoroastrian faith. One of the three tenets which we talk about is Humuta, Hukta, Huvarashta, which stands for good thoughts, good words, and good actions, good deeds. Everyone has good thoughts on this particular aspect, and they talk very loudly about what words can be used. I mean, it's a good word. So basically, hearing and speaking about it is not enough. We have to take actions. Everyone knows all this information is being sent out, and the people who are interested, they know about it. They are involved. They are all involved in it. But it's taking actions which is most important. And if you don't take actions,
Dr. Gandhi, maybe my English,
I think he understood the question, Luca, don't worry. He's answering in his own way here. What you're saying is that we need more action by people.
That's exactly. It's knowing and talking about is no good.
Yeah.
Unless until we take actions.
Just don't eat hamburgers. I mean, it's obvious.
And for which we are all responsible. We are all responsible.
Yeah.
It's not just one person.
I didn't get the point. It's not a matter of responsibility.
We need to move on to our next speaker. I'm sorry about that. Can you put your question in chat to Dr. Gandhi? If you have any questions to Gandhi, he can wait for a couple of minutes and he'll take them in chat. And I'm happy to share contacts with people. Okay, we need to move on to Morag Fairley, who's joining us from Scotland, which hosted COP26. And Morag is herself a green activist, works for Scottish independence, and is a member of the World Intellectual Forum for Europe, and has hopefully can tell us what's going on in Scotland, which is a sort of showcase for green activities. Morag, welcome.
Hello, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. We're actually just about 2 o'clock here in Scotland, so not too far behind you, Thomas. So Scotland and climate change. Scotland's actually doing a lot for the fight of climate change. One of the major programmes at the moment is the reintroduction of beavers. They went extinct. They were hunted to extinction here in Scotland and completely wiped out. It's like either through culling for their fur, or because they were seen as pests, or for whatever reason they were wiped out and made extinct. They were reintroduced in 2009 here in Scotland very slowly, and there's been a family that's been watched at the moment where I stay here in Loch Lomond in Ballach at the start of the Trossachs, and they're getting on very, very well, and it's like they're absolutely thriving now. Is like, so there's a special study on them and how they're thriving, and as everyone knows, it's like they help to alleviate flooding, they reduce pollution, encourage natural growth, create new wetlands, boost fish population, and that's just a natural resource that's there. And they were already here in Scotland. They used to be in Scotland, so it's not reintroducing a foreign creature. They were here, so they're back. To help with fighting climate change, there's a car scrappage scheme in Scotland, because the Scottish government are hoping to slowly but surely phase out the need for petrol and diesel cars for more greener options. They've actually put over 100 million, I think it is, towards, I've got the exact number somewhere, towards zero bus emission, green buses to be available. here in Scotland for people so that they can get that instead. There's going to be a much greener, better. Scotland is actually trying to take over our transport. At the moment, Westminster controls public transport. What it does, the wages, the control of it, everything is controlled by Westminster. We are slowly taking that back. Scotland is due to take that over. So Scotland's transport will be in Scotland's hands, but not yet. Hence the chaos at the moment. It's like the strikes and then everything that everybody's seeing in the news, and half of them are blaming, it's like what's happening in Scotland is Scotland's fault. It's not. Scottish government doesn't have control of that yet. The talks are being taken by Westminster, not by Scottish government. Even though it is part of Scotland and for Scotland, it's not part of Scottish government that's organising that. It's Westminster. The other thing that they've done is through all the schools, every primary, every nursery, all of them have a garden, and they've got a special green education thing that they do so that children can learn where their food comes from. They grow their own fruit and vegetables in their own patch through various projects in the schools, and then the children get to watch their own fruit and vegetable grow, and then from the garden straight onto their plates in various different wee projects. So I think that's a fantastic thing that's been happening for a wee while. There's a separate climate adaptation committee that was set up by the Scottish government, and they set that up separate from the government to attack climate change and how Scotland can do more for climate change, not only for Scotland but for the entire world. So they done that. The Justice Fund that was set up during COP26, Scotland was the very first one to put anything into it. It's like for reparation to the poorer countries of what happened with the deforestation and overfishing and all sorts of things. Scotland was the very first one to offer up any actual monetary value, and that was during COP26. Also during COP26, Scotland was one of the only ones to be offered, and was the very first one to be offered the Friends Summit of COP26. And much to Boris's dismay, she was also given a gift. She was awarded a gift to the Scottish people, presented one at Kelvin Grove Art Galleries when they had the event there. It's like for all of them, for all the committee members that were there, she was presented a gift by President Biden for the people of Scotland for hosting COP26, and they tried to keep that out of the papers, but they weren't very successful. It's like it was still in there. More recently, she's went over to America because of Scotland's work in their offshore wind farming and tidal energy. It's like for cleaner energy. It's like America wanted to use our plans and bases and of how we managed it, it's like especially the ones further out in the North Sea, as a basis to help start theirs. So that was one of the main things that was discussed while she was over there recently, when she was over having talks with President Biden and his senior staff, which only made 5 minutes of BBC News. I think it wasn't covered in any of our newspapers or media outlets. It was strictly just kept to online that she was over there having talks and also talking about Scottish independence and how we can have a more beneficial relationship with each other. More recently, just a couple of days ago, she arrived in Paris. She arrived in Paris at the weekend, and again discussing with Paris about trade things and about feminism and all the rest of it. From next year, the boat will be restarting. It's like they'll be starting a direct ferry link between Scotland and the EU in 2023, and that will go from Rosyth to Zeebrugge. I'm sorry that I do apologise for brutalising that. It's like so that will start from 2023. It will only take cargo to start with, but they're hoping within a couple of short months after it's starting, they'll also take passengers. And again, that's not only linked to trade, but to hopefully Scottish independence and our links with Europe, and it all ties in, as well as her talks with Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill. Was it? Yes, Michelle O'Neill on the 20th of May met at Butte House. It's like to also discuss how our close relatives, our Celtic cousins, Celtic brothers and sisters over in Ireland, it's like how we can both benefit each other, not only within a united Ireland, but it's within a united independent Scotland. And as they pointed out, it's like Scotland is a third of the landmass of the UK. Scotland provides 100% of the fresh water that's put out to the UK. We also think 60% of fishing is provided by Scotland, as well as over 2/3 of the fishing grounds is by Scotland and owned in Scotland, as well as 100% of the oil, over 80% of the agricultural population, 100% of the whisky import, 100% of the salmon imports, and that's only a small fraction of what Scotland offers. That's not including the filming industry, the tourism, and everything else that Scotland has to offer that not only coincides with climate and greener energies and having festivals, and it's like to encourage people to have greener. They've got the reduce, reuse and recycle campaigns right across the country, and not only in people's homes, but they're offering free bins. You can get as many blue, brown and green bins as you. They're offered 1 green bin for each household. That's your general waste. Your blue bins are all the recycling. So your paper, your plastics, your cardboard, all that kind of stuff go in our blue bins. Then our brown bins is for all your ecological waste. So your food waste or garden waste, all that kind of stuff goes in the brown bins, and that goes to be composted. Now you can have as many as you like for all your recycling, and then that's all done. It's like to help reduce carbon and also reduce waste and all that kind of stuff in Scotland as well. There's also things starting up. It's like where upcycling is very much on the rise, and people are loving it. There's groups out there. There's 20-minute local committee programs. It's like within different areas, it's like where people can go and they all share skills. It's like electricians, builders, joiners, it's like whoever it is, they all go, they all share skills to help upcycle old items that don't work anymore, or they just need a new facelift and they can't afford new, so they'll maybe swap out for something, or they'll maybe upcycle it. So it helps not only the people, but it helps to reduce waste as well by going to landfills and going to encourage people to use more charity shops and use more furniture charity shops and things like that. And the Scottish Government has put 180 million towards the emergency energy crisis. It's like to reduce carbon emissions and phase out the need. Is like for more waste. They've put in a bid to join the EU after Scottish independence. They've also put in a bid to join NATO. So eventually, as it says, like it can't be done safely straight away. It will have to be done slowly. But nuclear weapons will be gone from Scotland as part of the EU rules. It's like to do away with all nuclear weapons, and we will join NATO instead. They're going to put in a bid to join part of NATO. Nicola Sturgeon has already came out and said this publicly, that Scotland would apply to join NATO. They'd still have Faslane, but it wouldn't be a nuclear base. It would be a forces base, it would be a naval base, but it would be ones more like that's in the EU. There's still naval bases, but there's no weapons of mass destruction there at all. So it would work like that. And that's it. I thought I'd leave the last few wee whiles for any questions anyone wanted to ask so far. It's like on climate things before I go on to Scottish independence properly.
Right, thank you very much, Morag. That's that was very interesting. And you know, I have loads of questions that arise. Does anyone have any burning questions? Or maybe you should go on to the Scottish independence thing, because obviously the two are so interconnected. A lot of the green policies that Scotland would like to, you know, do, like transport and stuff, you can't, because you're ruled from Westminster, which is ruled by a Tory, you know, despotism, really, it seems to me. And so maybe let's move on to the independence issue. Tell us about that.
Well, one of the things that Westminster really hates is that at the moment, take your minimum wage, for example, national minimum wage is set at £7 something, I think it is. It's like from Westminster. Scotland has set it at £10. But at the moment, that's voluntary. It's up to the individual businesses and people of whether they use because it's only recommended at the moment, because Scotland doesn't set it. So it's like if it was in Scotland and by Scotland and controlled by the Scottish government, then the minimum set for wages would be £10 an hour. They would also bring pensions and various other things up to coincide with EU standards. That would have to be phased slowly. It wouldn't just happen overnight, because our economy would have to grow, then we would have to grow and everything else. So it wouldn't happen straight away, but it would slowly happen. Everybody keeps going on about money, especially down south. It's like, oh, Scotland can't have money. We've already got the Scottish pound. There's already the sterling. It's like with Robert the Bruce and various other ones on it. And back in 2014, they says it is like potentially one option would be to keep the Queen as head of state. That way they could keep the currency. The currency would still be sterling. And there's many places in England that actually don't accept the Scottish pound as legal currency. They say it doesn't exist. They refuse to take it. If you try and spend Scottish money in England, they won't accept it. Yes, Sean, you have a burning question. I see your hand up.
Yeah, you'll have to unmute.
Thanks. Just could you say something about the nuclear bases in Scotland? What's the proposals for them going forward? Thanks.
Well, at the moment, it's like, but kind of stuck with them, unfortunately. But what they said was, it's like that Westminster would have to pay Scotland to keep them and look after them, while they are building a suitable base in England for them. This would have to happen. They'd also have to provide Scotland with the Scottish government with a plan on how they're going to do that, where they're going to do that, and to send them down safely. That's if they want to keep them. If they don't want to keep them, then specialists, experts, and a huge, big, massive group of people will come in to decommission them or thin them or whatever it is they do to them to make them safe and get rid of them. So they've got their choices. So if they want to keep them, then they can pay us to look after them for a little while they're building their own base down south, and they can have them down there. They can keep them. Or we pay to get rid of them. And it's decommissioned, but that will probably come out of the money that they'd have to pay us to keep them in the first place. So we just use that money to decommission it and get rid of it. So there's those two options there for them. It's like if they want to keep it, then they have to build somewhere to be able to keep it for, because they've already came out and says, look, we don't want them. It's dangerous Scotland. It would wipe out the entire central belt of Scotland, well into the Highlands, just about the entire south. There'd only be a tiny little bit at the border, if, God forbid, anything happened. So can't have that at all. It's like one of the Tories came up and it's like, look, be fair, we can't really lose Scotland. It's like, if we lose Scotland, we lose a third of the land mass, we lose ease of travel throughout the country, and it's letting going up to Scotland. We lose the education that Scotland offers, we lose access to the world-renowned education system. It's like with some of the best universities in the world. It's like with Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Inverness universities. It's like they're up there in the top 10 of world universities of the best. They'd lose import of whiskey, they'd lose the import of salmon, because at the moment it's like they shut down Aberdeen where it used to be imported from, and then they moved it down south, so that every penny from the export and import of whiskey and the fishing industry and salmon went to the English pockets, the English monies. But if Scotland went independent, control of that would come back to us.
Sure.
100% control would come back to us, as well as the fresh water and everything else. Would have to pay us to send down fresh water. No, they wouldn't get it automatically for free, as well as gas, electricity, the wind turbines, which provide almost 80% so far, because like we provide a lot more than what we use, a lot less than what we actually provide.
Sure.
So there's more than enough for every person in Scotland.
Morag, any other questions? We've got 10 minutes for discussing this. Let me just say a few words whilst people are thinking.
The vote will be next year. So encourage everybody to vote.
Right. Yeah, the independence referendum, the second independence.
Yes, yep, it's set for next year. Westminster is doing everything they can to try and stop it. With every single dirty trick in the book, they are attempting to stop it. And even at one of the more recent committee meetings, SNP, MSP was told at Westminster to suck it up and get with the programme.
What? Who said that? Who?
That was the words that were used. I'll tag you in so you can copy it to people. She was told to suck it up and get with the programme.
Yeah, but that's British imperialism. I mean, Scotland is a colony of the English, and now the Scots are fighting back and have had enough.
Well, Scotland is a sovereign nation, and they're trying to deny this.
Sure.
And it's like, you can't deny it. It's an ancient law. It's like, you can try and deny it all you like, but it's written, it's law. Scotland is a sovereign nation, so it's going to happen. You can't stop it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a late convert to the cause of Scottish independence, as you know, but I am now a convert, and I'm a convert because of the green argument, if nothing else. Britain has got away long enough, this United Kingdom, with being a sort of global power, doing colonialism.
The green argument is very strong. We've already planted, for example, over 18,000 hectares of new woodlands. And they've restored they want to restore up to 25,000 hectares of peatland by 2030.
Yeah.
It's like towards the fight for climate change. And there's also a committee to help how the recent climate changes are affecting Scotland. So we've also had a fair share of wildfires up in the Highlands and on the hills. There's also been forest fires and various other things. There was a very serious fire not that long ago on Ben Lomond.
Oh, no.
Where firefighters were up there for about 4 or 5 days attempting to get the blaze under control, because it was that bad. It's like with the heather and the gorse up there. It's like, it was very, very difficult to put it out. So we've also had a fair share of floods and fires and.
We're having a hot summer. Is the weather abnormally warm for you at the moment in Scotland?
Yes and no. Usually it's like the tiniest little bit of sun. A Scottish person will run out straight away in a pair of shorts. They see sun, they go, "Yeah, it's summer." It's like, it doesn't matter if it's warm or not. But it's not been as hot up here as what it's been in England. England has had it warmer than what we've had. I think the hottest day we've had so far was 21, I think it was. So hot, but not too hot.
Right. Just to correct one thing, Morag, because I lived in Wales also for 10 years, and the Welsh also supply water to England. You said Scotland provides 100% of English water. It's not true. I just want to correct.
Just the fresh water supply.
No, Wales produces fresh water as well. I mean, the reservoirs of North Wales supply Liverpool and Birmingham. So, that's a factually incorrect statement. But I love the spirit behind your talk. I just want to correct some of the details. Okay. Any other questions? I mean, does anyone, you see, the Scottish independence movement doesn't get on the world media. This is the problem, Morag. No, I wonder if our friends in India and America and elsewhere have heard of this cause. Would anyone like to say, have you heard of this question? And do you think Scottish independence is a good idea? Anyone want to reply? No, you see, it doesn't hit the headlines because The problem is that London controls a lot of the world's media.
A lot of the media. I know it's
Rupert Murdoch has a monopoly on news in Australia and America and so on, and they're against independence.
Very much so.
You're going to break through the media bubble.
It's like they'd have far too much to lose if Scotland went independent.
Yeah, that's why they
say that there's no thirst for independence in Scotland.
Yeah,
they're trying to say that it's like the last march in Scotland, there was only 1,000 people that took to the streets of Glasgow, where Police Scotland said that it was nearer to 100,000 people that turned up for the independence marches in Glasgow. So they only left out a few zeros.
Reality, it distorts political things and bends it to its will. So anyway, I have confidence that you and the other independence activists are going to get this together. There's a group called Now Scotland, which I'm a member of, and Morag has been to some of our meetings. And the Scottish government, the SNP, is committed to it in a referendum next year. It raises lots of interesting legal, political issues that we're going to talk about tomorrow when we talk about global governance. I believe with Leopold Kohr that smaller nations can federate. That was Rousseau's idea. We need smaller nations. So Scotland could be independent, Catalonia, Ukraine, let these smaller nations separate from the big nations like Armenia, etc., and then let them come together in some kind of global peace federation, which Professor Glen Martin is going to talk about in a few minutes, I think. It makes sense to me, instead of these fighting superpowers like Britain, Russia, USA, let's devolve that power structure to the grassroots of the green activists at local level. Don't you think?
Oh, 100%. It's like, and what the world has stood up with Ukraine and says it's like, and put in sanctions against Russia. It's like with their gas or whatever that they're getting off of Russia. Westminster has not.
Well, they came
and Scotland has spoken up to say this is very, very wrong. They say that they're eventually going to do it and they're going to phase it out. But how long the phase out is going to take, no one's actually said. They've just said that they will phase it out. When, how slow, no one actually knows.
So just for background, because we're coming to the end of your slot, just to tell people that are on the call, in 2016, Britain had this referendum to leave the EU, and they, by a very small number on paper, a minority of British people voted for that. But the right-wing media and press had weaponized the referendum. And it now turns out that Russia had also been part of that weaponization because they wanted to break up the European Union. Scotland voted to stay in the European Union. So did
about 67% of Scottish people, it's like voted to remain. In fact, I think it was more than that, voted to remain.
We have a long history between France.
And majority of Northern Ireland voted to remain as well.
Yeah. So the English Tory government, which then took power to do Brexit, went against the will of the Scottish people, against the will of the people of Northern Ireland, and against the will of actually the majority of English and Welsh people, because a lot of people didn't even bother to vote. And this has caused a crisis in democracy in the UK, where a minority government has pursued a ruthless agenda to break up Europe. And a lot of it was funded, it turns out. The English Tory party was infiltrated by Russian oligarchs, billionaires, who funded the whole plan. And Parliament has been used to shield that information from the public. So I'm just telling people on this call, if you don't know this, you haven't been reading the right books.
There was also there was a lot of scaremongering going on at the time as well, because like they were telling people that they wouldn't be able to travel to see family, they'd lose their pensions, they'd lose their bus passes, they'd lose their jobs. It's like all sorts of other things would happen, and it's like my own mum phoned up breaking her heart, thinking that she was going to lose her pension, she was going to lose her house, she was going to lose everything. It's like because they had her terrified.
Yeah, scared her.
When the No campaign came to our door.
Yeah.
Never came back after I visited.
No, I mean, it's ruled by fear. You see, the World Intellectual Forum has to stand up for an end to fear. And the politicians use fear to divide us, to create terror between different countries, cultures, ethnicities, you know. And this is why we should stand for unity and love, opposing that fear. And
it's starting now. Even online, there was an article that Boris Johnson's now wife, then mistress, was offered an over £100 million job within the government, and it mysteriously disappeared from it's still in the printed paper, but it mysteriously disappeared from the online papers to some kind of article about the EU judges. But right across the board, it disappeared. It went from Sky News, from MSN, from Daily Mail, Daily Records, all the major media outlets it disappeared from. Sure. Even though the article was up online, because it was about their ties to Russia. It's like how she was offered a £100 million job that she was completely and utterly unsuitable and unqualified for. And it would have been a big scandal and a big thing against them and against Westminster, and it mysteriously disappeared and was taken offline.
Well, there we are. That's what I meant by media dictatorship. But it's 100,000, Morag. You know, I assure you, 100 million, no. But anyway, I think our message back to you is keep fighting, keep the faith.
Yes, you're right. Sorry, I do apologise. It was 100. I'm looking at the thumbs from.
No,
I'm looking at the money.
It's 100 million apart from.
It's 100 million that the Scottish government put into the carbon campaign.
Yeah, no,
100,000 for her.
Anyway, we salute you and keep up the good fight. And Scottish intellectuals are very important. There was a man called Chevalier Ramsay who came to France from Scotland and was one of the greatest philosophers of the 18th century. So, you know, and I don't know if people know, Kant was part Scottish in his descent, and Karl Marx's wife was part Scottish. You know, so the Scots get about in the diaspora. Right, thank you very much, Morag. Let's move on now to our next speaker, who is from India, Dr. Kaushala Prasad Mishra. And he is joining us from, I'm not sure exactly, he can say, I think possibly Mumbai. Dr. Mishra is essentially a scientist for many, many years. He's held a number of important academic posts. He's been with the University of Mumbai and also with the Jain University in Ladnun, where I've spoken. And his field is radiation research, the therapeutic and medicinal use of radiation. And he's served as president of the Asian Association of Radiation. It's an honor to welcome you, Dr. Mishra, and thank you for coming to our meeting and addressing us. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Can you please enable share screen? Thomas, can you please enable share screening? Share screening is disabled.
Okay, sorry, give me a minute. Right, you should be able to share it now.
Is it done? Go to the here. Click on the screen. Where is it? Here. Here. Click on it. Click, double click. Yes. Ask them. Are they able to see the screen? Thomas, you are able to see the screen now?
Yes, we can see it. Fine. Yeah.
Great. Yes. So good evening. Science in preventing environmental catastrophe on planet Earth. So I will be synthesizing how science observes the environment, how science can tackle the degradation of the environment. And I will give you some glimpse of what we have been doing in this direction. So, as you know, science is committed to serve humanity, and basically it is committed to unravel the secret of nature, which is guided by curiosity, puzzles, unknowns, and many questions on whys and hows, etc. Science is also committed to explore and advance knowledge on universal issues without borders ever expanding, contributes to global peace and prosperity, and most importantly, dares beyond, not only on the Earth planet, but also other planets in the universe, solves the new problems that arise in respect of industrial problems, technical issues, diseases, environmental changes, and others. Most importantly, science predicts the trends and events for future. And this is done on the basis of modeling and analysis. That's a very important aspect that is there in scientific working. Evidently, environment impacts the globe, and climate change and global warming are the biggest environmental challenge today, affecting the planet and the humanity. We are observing frequent extreme weathers, droughts, floods, loss of crops, recurring forest fires, frequent storms and cyclones. These are the visible environmental changes that we are seeing. And environmental changes that concern us are the climate change, which is overall change in the patterns over a period of time, global warming, which is average temperature rise, poverty, that is related to failure of agricultural crops, cattle, ocean, and rivers, diseases and pandemics with respect to human health. A very important point in this slide that I have tried to include is socio-economic problems. Socio-economic problems deal with social response of the situation. Yesterday we were talking about psychopolitical situation. And it is here in this slide that how the socio-economic problems can arise that can lead to unrest, and they can also lead to psychopolitical issues. How degradation of the environment has occurred, which is a matter of concern to us. The first is the population growth that occurred, exponential growth in population that led to degradation of environment. Urbanization, basically the migration of population from rural area to urban areas, is going on all over the world. And also the industrialization also led to the degradation of environment. Many technological advancements are taking place all over the world, and they are needing a space in the whole frame of things. infrastructural requirements and developments require certain changes in the environment by necessity. Human consumptions and lifestyles are the ones which affect environment. Most importantly, the pollution that is occurring all over, both in water, in air, in soil, elsewhere, they have visible cause of the degradation of environment. Now, I will deal with next 4 or 5 slides. The pollution is the major factor for environmental degradation. There are many others, but in this talk, I'm trying to focus on pollution issue. Understanding the environment is a basic issue today. And this understanding is to environmental pollution that change physical, chemical, and biological character of any component of the environment and affect air, water, soil, that cause harmful effects on various forms of life and property. Pollution is a term that we employ to define influence of any substance causing nuisance, including noise, causing harmful effects and uneasiness to the organism. Pollutant are any substances which cause nuisance and harm and cause uneasiness. With this understanding, I proceed to give what are the major pollution types that today we are faced with. Water pollution, someone spoke today, air pollution, land pollution, noise pollution, also the pollution in the sea, and many other factors. Air pollution, you know, is being caused mainly from industry and is a cause of concern to those who are investigating environment, art, and creating models. Then we have pollution coming from industrial wastes. Water pollution is the major source of wastewater discharged from industries and commercial bodies. These industries are chemical, metallurgical, food processing industries, textile, papers, and so on. They discharge several organic and inorganic substances without screening at their end and mindlessly polluting the discharge centers. Agricultural waste, particularly relevant to India and other agricultural countries, chemical fertilizers and pesticides have become very essential for present-day high-yielding crops requirement. Consequently, they have become a potential source of water pollution. These fertilizers contain major plants and nutrients, mainly nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Excess fertilizers may reach the groundwater by leaching or may be mixed with surface water in the discharge solutions. So next slides, I will talk about what are the major strategies to save environment and humanity. What can we do using science, using new knowledge, using new technologies? Obviously, science is to lead. Science ensures technological sovereignty. Anyone who has technological superiority has advantage in the globe today. Science allows expansion of innovation capacity, and it also infuses competitiveness, and it offers solution to arising problems. Therefore, on the whole, science has a big role to play in checking the deterioration of environment. So what needs to be done? What needs to be done is to accelerate science action. Science has a very important role in saving environment by monitoring gas emissions, both from industry and other sources, by mitigating sources of greenhouse gas emissions from energy production and land use, by helping adopt to new climatic realities, including the shortages in the food industry and in the technological field. So what are the environmental issues which need our priorities now? Continued research and development is a key point. Scientific and technical innovations are required for protecting environment. The major objectives are to reduce impact of global warming, helping to adapt to climatic change, and also to see whether we can re-radiate the heat that is going from Earth to the space. In global warming, we have the question that the gases from our use, especially carbon dioxide and methane gas, they absorb heat, but when they are and they re-radiate this heat to space. But when there is no CO2 or excess of CO2, the warming occurs. This is prominently called greenhouse effect, which means gases like nitrogen carbon dioxide. Most important task that science has, that scientists have, social activists have, is how to achieve decarbonization. Decarbonization is a very important factor in climatology, lowering the carbon dioxide emission. How to do it? Low carbon technology for energy production have to be adopted, like solar, wind, nuclear, and others. Technologies for curtailing gas emissions, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, has to be tackled. And now I will talk about it a little later, the sequestering of CO2, what we call new technology to store carbon dioxide on the surface of the Earth, which is at the moment not in the hand of scientists, not in the hand of planners, not in the hand of policymakers. The net zero emission goal is an important aspect in environmental sciences. Sooner that carbon dioxide emissions get to net zero, the less climate damage will occur the world over and suffering will be mitigated. The net zero in this case refers to what happens when you take all the activities that add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, such as fossil fuel burning, deforestation, etc. It includes the effects of naturally occurring and engineered carbon sinks, which remove carbon dioxide from atmosphere. So this is the new technology that is happening. Net zero emission means that the emission going from Earth and the heat returning is zero. Carbon dioxide, net excess carbon dioxide is zero in the atmosphere. This is a very laudable goal, which is not easy to achieve, but I will just talk in the next slides how the nuclear technology has come to our rescue. What are the ways we can adopt this pollution which is causing harm to environment? We believe that it is a responsible thing to do increase recycling. It is just like doing laundry and separating blacks and colors. The residents of the country should also try and do their part and put in at least one day a litter picking up. That's the solution of how to deal with pollution. In the terminology of environmental science, pollution control solutions include what we call reuse, reduce, and recycle. That means a system in which we do not allow the waste material or the resources to be wasted away, but recycle even the waste to use, not allow this to pollute environment. Now, a few slides I will give you, which is very novel in science today. Nuclear energy seems to be an option for net zero carbon emission, which is the goal of environmentalists, technologists, and policyholders. IAEA action says that it helps countries to growing energy demand. We cannot do without energy, therefore energy is required. What to do for that? To improve energy security, reduce environmental and health impacts, and mitigation of the climate change. International Atomic Energy Agency is in action. The clean energy we talk about is one of the clean energy is nuclear energy. Coal remains the largest source of electricity generation globally, a major source of energy for industry, including steel manufacturing and heating. The clean energy transition means shifting energy production away from sources that release a lot of greenhouse gases to those that release little or no greenhouse gases. The challenge of the clean energy transition is twofold: to eliminate entrenched use of unabated fossil fuel while scaling up low carbon sources and renewable like hydro, solar, wind, and other kinds of energy. So energy is requirement of the humans. Energy requirement is also for our progress. Nuclear power is argued to replace coal. Coal and nuclear power plants both operate to produce heat and create steam that drives electricity generating turbines. Coal provides more than a third of global electricity generation. Nuclear power is equipped to fill the void resulting from coal plant closures and can provide round-the-clock base load power in all weather conditions. Nuclear power can complement wind and solar, whose electricity generation depends on weather. The base load power is what is required to be said, the minimum amount of energy that is required to produce electricity by whatever means. Nuclear science and technology to climate adaptation, very important issue today in the international circle. This is hot topic for discussion. IAEA is contributing significantly to help adapt climate change situation through increasing awareness among the people, among the stakeholders. It has demonstrated how governments, farmers, and others can increase resilience to the impacts of climate change and achieve more sustainable management of land and water by protecting and restoring nature and reforming the food and farming system to clear the science. How can we prevent the catastrophic climatic change that is lurking around us? To avoid catastrophic climatic change requires drastically reducing greenhouse emissions, to reducing the amount of carbon dioxide that is already in the atmosphere and prevent more additions of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. This means protecting and restoring forests so that they can store more carbon. You know that plants convert carbon dioxide into food. However, many renewable energy policies around the world promote logging and burning forest wood as a source of so-called zero carbon or carbon neutral. This is not very good situation. It's subject to discussion. What are the new science endeavors now to tackle this situation with which the world is faced? In order to achieve sustainability, scientists are developing many innovative materials. New material, which is what we call biomaterial,
to store carbon dioxide in the greenhouse effect reduction and global warming tackling. That means we are developing biomaterial which can absorb 100 to 1,000 times carbon dioxide more than we can retain carbon dioxide on the earth by any other means. So this is a new, very new technology that we are doing. This is my last slide, but ladies and gentlemen, I would like to pay attention to this slide. And I apologize in case some of you do not like this, but I have my strong conviction. This slide is the last slide, but very important slide, which I put in first. More science is needed now than before, warranting more investments in science. So that is the one major thing that science demands to serve society. Science and technology will enable us better prepared to meet the challenges of the future in terms of getting clean energy, pollution-free environment, adequate food, necessary shelters, poverty eradication, and disease-free society. That's how science is promising. Competently overcoming future challenges will allow us to move towards a progressive, robust economy with the emergence of wealthier nations. And very importantly, I would like to point out, above all, a more contented global society capable of preventing war and practicing peace on the Earth planet. Through this talk, I try to argue that the development of science and progress of science will contribute to the practice of peace and also perhaps making more contented society. And my argument is that the societies where there is a conflict, when they are prosperous, when they are happier, when they are contented, there will be mitigation of conflicts and growth of the living together towards making a new civilized society, looking forward to the modernity. This is my argument in this talk. And with this, I would like to thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much, Dr. Mishra. Very interesting talk. And you gave us a good overview of how science can help explain the environmental problems, but also how it can help with the solutions. So who would like to go first with a question? We have time for a few questions here to Dr. Mishra.
Yeah, most welcome.
Yeah. Anyone want to? I think it's best if you put your hand up in the chat or in the, just put your yellow hand up. I mean, I will go first, Dr. Mishra. I mean, obviously, you're an expert in nuclear science. You're a radiation specialist, and you believe in nuclear energy as a solution, part of the solution. I noted that Morag said in Scotland they have 2 nuclear plants that they're going to phase out. And I think Germany has just got rid of it's phasing out its nuclear energy. Here in France, we like nuclear energy. And the French, energy mix is, based a lot on nuclear energy. So I'm neutral on this. But I do know that a lot of people are very concerned about nuclear energy because we had Fukushima, we had 3 Mile Island, we had Chernobyl. How do we know it's not going to cause yet more accidents in the future? If we say, yes, nuclear energy is the solution, how can we guarantee no more of those type of accidents?
Yeah.
Would you like to address that point?
Yeah, certainly. In nuclear sciences, when we talk about the nuclear power, we give example of France, because 70 to 80% of their energy is met by nuclear sources.
Yeah.
And France has a very high record of safety. There is no recorded accident that requires major attention of scientists. This way, the Japanese scientists and technologists are to be congratulated. I believe the safety concerns in nuclear science is very high, and there is no any let up or compromise on safety. So as a scientist, I would like to assure public and also those who are informed about it, that the safety issues, public can rest assured that scientists would not let happen anything untoward.
Right. Dr. Mishra, could you stop your screen sharing, please? Because we're still looking at your screen. If you could end that.
What is your question? I couldn't get it.
Could you please stop screen sharing?
Good.
So that we're no longer looking at your slides.
Yes. Do you want to see the slide?
Now, I want you to stop screen sharing. I can't do it myself. You have to do it.
Okay. Yes, yes. I'll do that. Yes.
Right. Thank you. Okay, any other questions for Dr. Mishra before we go on to our next speaker, who's Professor Glen Martin? I mean, green issues are very important for us as a planet. We need, you know, to put our minds together on this. How do they plan to combat the waste produced from nuclear energy? This is a question from Scotland to Dr. Mishra. If we're going to have nuclear energy as a basis, what do we do with the waste? What do they do in Asia? What is your advice on that? Okay.
This question is very crucial, and scientists are more than adequately concerned with it. And the research and development is going on that we will be able to solve the problem of nuclear waste. I do not think that globally this will be an issue, because internationally we are very united and we are looking for how to deal with the nuclear waste such that there is no public harm of even smallest significance. And therefore, I'm pretty sure that nuclear waste issue will be solved. At the moment, it is very much in control of the scientists and those who are in the nuclear research centers. They are aware and they are holding it. And we also know that the public concern sometimes that arises, it's sometimes unfounded. And we will tackle this situation by research and development. And I think this one of the technology that we are at the moment working on is condensing the nuclear waste to minimum volume. This will solve a big issue that at the moment public has and scientists have.
Okay.
If we can reduce.
A lot of people remain to be convinced, but if you want to share in the chat any research you're aware of that's tackling this problem, that would be helpful. Sean English has a question. This is your last question for this slot, and then we move on to Glen Martin. Sean.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Yeah, I was really impressed with your slides and great, but you never mentioned the dangers and the risks of science. And I mean, they are big risks to do with nuclear weapons. I mean, we're the first generation. Scientists has given us that gift of extermination of every life form on the planet. You know, that's a very dangerous thing to give to a very frail species like ourselves. There is big risks with science as well. I can see all the positives, and thanks very much.
Yeah. Sheen, would you like me to respond by a few sentences?
In a nutshell, have you got an answer for that?
Okay. Okay. My submission is that anything good has got always some bad in it. And likewise, like in the drug industry, any drug which is not taken carefully is poison. Nuclear technology is not exception. Nuclear technology, if used safely, has proved to be boon rather than a cause for any fear. I believe that the nuclear diagnostic techniques, whole world is today benefited by CT, X-rays, gamma rays, accelerators, treatment of cancer. 40% of the cancer are treated by nuclear technology methods. So it's a question of balance. What is the good part and what is the bad part of it? And we scientists look to optimize the benefits of a technology, even though there is a risk admittedly.
Right. Well, that's a good answer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mishra. Okay, it's my pleasure now to move on and introduce Professor Glen Martin, who is a philosopher and probably has some views on the link between science and philosophy. And he's also a tireless champion of our work as philosophers for peace. We've known each other for some 30 years. He's been very active in organizing for a world federal, international system, and has thought through the metaphysics of the problems going on the planet in great detail, including now the threats by climate change and climate collapse, as he calls it. So he's going to address us on the subject of deadly climate collapse, the criteria for sustainability, and the role of the Earth Constitution. And he's joining us from New England. So Professor Glen Martin, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you everybody for being here and for the previous speakers, which were very interesting. As the title of my paper that Tom just read means that the paper has three sections. First is climate disaster, second, the criteria for sustainability, and third, the Earth Constitution. The paper is largely drawn from my recent book on the climate, which came out last summer in 2021. And I'll mention the book as I go through the paper. The paper was written just for today's half-hour presentation. So part one is called climate disaster. Climate disaster is engulfing our planet. We are no longer in a period of dire projections and frightening predictions as we were in the 1960s and 70s. Today, book after book, report after report from the Worldwide Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change document our ongoing planetary disaster. Massive heat waves regularly engulf entire nations. In addition to causing immediate deaths, these heat waves induce drought and massive crop failures. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. My recent book on the environment is entitled The Earth Constitution Solution Designed for a Living Planet. It reviews this literature that I'm about to talk about in some depth. At the same time, agricultural lands, as is well known, are shrinking around the planet, while the population continues to skyrocket toward 8 billion inhabitants. Agricultural land is overcultivated due to the ever-increasing demand for food, and grazing lands are also overgrazed. Both, science tells us, are steadily degrading in productivity worldwide. Devastating storms and superstorms are generated by the heat and annually increase in frequency. The heat itself is rising ocean levels and the flooding of coastlines. Billions of tons of CO2 that human activities dump into the Earth's atmosphere annually do not only intensify the greenhouse effect. Much of that CO2 is absorbed in the warming, acidifying oceans, contributing to the death of fisheries and vast oceanic dead zones. The global fish catch has been steadily declining since its peak in 1985. Right, so we've got agricultural lands declining, oceans declining. The heat of the planet has led to an unprecedented spread of insect pests and tropical diseases. The pine bark beetle, for example, has destroyed millions of acres of northern forests in the past few years alone. The only defense against these voracious insects has been very cold winters. These are now past. Every year, winters get milder, and the ecological balance that keeps these dangers in check is broken. Massive extinction, excuse me. Massive extinctions of the world's living creatures have been going on for decades, and the ecosystems that support life unravel at an ever faster pace. The largest physical structures on our planet, the largest structures, the ice caps, the barrier reefs, and the rainforests are disappearing before our very eyes. The Greenland ice sheet, 2 miles thick, is melting at extreme speeds, and the gigantic Antarctica ice cap, also 2 miles thick, is becoming unstable, portending massive ocean level rises that will flood the major coastal cities of the world and destroy untold millions of acres of coastal croplands. Top environmental experts no longer issue dire warnings. Today, they speak in apocalyptic terms. It is happening now all around us. Environmental scientist James Gustav Speth declares, quote, "We are looking into an abyss." Leading environmentalist Bill McKibben observes that, quote, "Civilization is beginning to falter." Environmental writer and well-known environmental expert Donald Wallace Wells speaks of, quote, "the coming uninhabitable Earth." Tipping point after tipping point has already been passed during the last 50 years. That is, points of no return. The effect is no longer a linear one, these scientists point out, of progressive worsening, but is a cascading effect of compounding disaster after ever worse disaster. McKibben writes, quote, "This is our reality now. It will get worse, but it is already very, very bad," unquote. Yet none of this has had a significant impact on the world's dominant preoccupations. It has not prevented businesses from practicing business as usual, nor the peoples of Earth from burning fossil fuels. It has not prevented nation states from preoccupying themselves with militarism and war, further destroying the environment while wasting astonishing amounts of fossil fuels. Nation states continually collectively spend some 1.9 trillion US per year on weapons and war. As Naomi Klein points out in her book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Environment, the mass media, themselves businesses and owned by the rich, have largely marginalized this issue, and many big oil corporations have intentionally spent millions of dollars instilling doubt in people's minds regarding the overwhelming scientific consensus. Nor has the world's environmental crisis prevented think tanks around the world, such as the World Intellectual Forum, from occupying themselves with trivialities and secondary issues. On all fronts, Nero fiddles while Rome burns. Part 2 of my paper is the criteria for sustainability. It is not there is not significant ambiguity about what must be done. We must stop pouring CO2, methane, and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Primarily, this means we must stop burning fossil fuels. We must stop the destruction of rainforests around the planet and begin protection, restoration of those and the croplands and the grasslands and the rest. We must stop overfishing the oceans and overcultivating the farmlands. We must reduce population growth. We must restore and regenerate soils and ecosystems as much as possible. We must free ourselves from the, quote, dogma of growth and develop a steady state economics that operates in harmony with our planetary biosphere. None of this is being done on any significant scale. Every year that goes by without action on a planetary scale compounds the severity of the disasters to come, possibly leading, these scientists say, to human extinction. Infinite growth on a finite planet is not only impossible, but insane. The specific criteria for a sustainable world system involves two interrelated dimensions. The first dimension is the one focused on by most environmental activists. It requires practical planetary programs of monitoring, continual adjustment, replanting, regeneration, planetary conversion to clean energy sources, and the building of local communities dedicated to sustainability. The second dimension, largely ignored by everyone, including environmental activists, that is required for sustainability involves the transformation of the three dominant global institutions that have caused the climate crisis in the first place. These three interrelated institutions are: one, global neoliberal capitalism; two, a world fragmented among competing militarized sovereign nation states; and three, a global monetary system based on debt and institutionalized repayment of debt. If there is to be a sustainable world system, it must be a united world system. The militarized competition among nation states, comprising at the moment a global struggle led by Russia, China, and Iran against a dollar-dominated global system led by the US and its lackeys, makes solving the environmental problem impossible. Militarism and weapons production alone are extremely destructive of the environment. And in the eyes of national security systems, militarism and war always trump environmental concerns. Secondly, the system of corporate domination of the global economy must be transformed. The largest corporations have assets greater than many nation states, and their charters require them to put profit before both human welfare and environmental considerations. Under the World Trade Organization and free trade agreement rules, corporations can even sue national governments that put laws in place cutting into their profit margins, and that includes environmental laws. Like the sovereign nation states, global corporate power lawlessly dominates global economics. These systems coincide in that the economic interests of nations are routinely placed above undertaking the transformations necessary to create a sustainable future. Today, for example, the US is in a self-proclaimed economic war with China, both of them economically competing for wealth, not to protect the global environment. Third, and intimately linked with the first two environmental destructive systems, is the global monetary system predicated on money as debt. As Ellen Brown points out in her book, Web of Debt, 99% of all the money in the world is created as debt. Business entrepreneurs take out a development loan from a bank, and the money is simply created on a computer screen as debt to the bank, taken at a certain interest rate. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, both located in the global imperial center of our planet, Washington, D.C., create money as debt lent to poor nations, ensuring their poverty and slavery to this system. Richard Heinberg's book, The End of Growth, describes this reality in great detail and shows how and why this debt system requires growth on the part of businesses and national economies. Without growth, the principal and interest on this debt cannot be repaid. If there is to be a sustainable world system, he shows, endless system-wide growth must end. Money will have to be created debt-free and by and large interest-free. The global economy will have to become what economist Herman E. Daly calls a steady state economy. In a global steady state economy, extraction of natural resources, especially non-renewables, must be reduced to a minimum. Production must be for durability and repairability rather than for endless consumption and the disposal of endless throwaway goods. Transportation must be minimized and converted away from the fossil fuel system and globalize shipping for trade. Discharge of heat and waste into the environment by all these processes must be reduced to an absolute minimum, with the majority of what is produced recycled and repaired. In addition, the population that relies on the system must be small enough to allow for a steady state situation on the planet. Leading environmentalist Jeremy Rifkin, for example, estimates a sustainable planetary population to be about 5 billion persons. Today, we are approaching 8 billion persons. The question inevitably arises at this point about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Do these goals meet the criteria for sustainability outlined above? Let us briefly review the UN's history with regard to environmental protection. The first UN conference on the environment took place in Stockholm in 1972. Scientists from around the world testified at that time that humanity was in great danger and recommended immediate drastic changes. Nothing changed. 20 years later, in 1992, people from around the world again gathered in the great environmental conference in Rio de Janeiro. This group recognized that little had been done to change the destructive world system. They proposed Agenda 21 program that major changes should be done by the 21st century, within the next decade. A decade later, the UN met again in Johannesburg in 2002. Again, the participants recognized that little had been accomplished toward making the world system sustainable. So the Millennium Development Goals were developed to be enforced from the year 2000 to the year 2015. 2015 came, another big environmental conference took place in Paris, and it was widely recognized that the MDGs had badly failed. So another more comprehensive plan of 17 Sustainable Development Goals was put in place from the year 2015 to the year 2030. From this history, it should be clear that the new plan will not be successful. It is voluntary for governments, and worse, the plan challenges neither capitalism, militarism, uncontrolled population growth, nor global debt-based banking and money creation. We are now 7 years into the SDG timeframe from 2015 to 2030. The demand for oil and natural gas has increased during these years, not decreased. The SDG goals are bound to fail. My book on climate change details why this is so. Chapter 6 of that book, The Earth Constitution Solution, shows in depth that the UN is predicated on the present world system of militarized sovereign nation states, globalized capitalism, and planetary debt-based money creation. The text of each of these 17 SDGs makes this very clear. Militarism is never mentioned in the whole document. 15,000 words this document is. Never mentioned. Capitalism is assumed, never mentioned. And debt on what it calls fair terms is offered to poor nations to help them achieve their SDGs. Neither do the SDGs consider the problem of an exploding planetary population, which again is not mentioned in that document. There is silence on all these issues, and hence the document guarantees its own failure and sets the stage for cascading tragedies mentioned above, including possible human extinction. Part 3, the Constitution for the Federation of Earth. My book, Earth Constitution Solution, shows how and why planetary sustainability and possibly human survival is only possible under the Constitution for the Federation of Earth or some very similar system. The Constitution converts all three macro features of the present world system identified above as collectively responsible for climate collapse to sustainable forms of governance and economics. The Constitution sets up a process of disarmament leading to a demilitarized world system. The Earth Federation government itself is non-military. The Constitution puts the people of Earth through their democratically elected representatives in the World Parliament and the World Financial Administration in charge of regulating global economics to end the vast wealth disparities that now exist, to create financial security for all the citizens of the planet with free healthcare, free education, adequate food and shelter, and a secure, protected planetary environment. It's a right under the Constitution. So-called free trade is converted in this manner to fair trade, directed to economic flourishing for all citizens of the Earth. And the resources of the planet necessary for sustainability, today privately or territorially owned by corporations or nation states, are made the collective property of the sovereign people of Earth. These include the oceans, the polar caps, the atmosphere of the Earth, and its essential resources like rainforests. No longer can the resources necessary for sustainability be exploited for private or nation state profit. Let me give an example to illustrate this issue. The UN Sustainable Development Goals document, in its introductory statement, item 18, states the following, quote, "We affirm that every state has and shall freely exercise full permanent sovereignty over all its wealth, natural resources, and economic activity," unquote. Consider what this means. Under the UN system, every large state on Earth has the legal right and the capacity to destroy the future of all humanity. The lungs of the Earth are located in Brazil. We know this, right? The large portion of the Earth's stability in terms of oxygen and so comes from the lungs of the Earth. According to the UN, Brazil has the legal right to cut down the Amazon forest and destroy the lungs of the Earth to enrich its businesses or whatever reasons. By the same token, the United States, the world's largest polluter, has the legal right and had the legal right to withdraw from the 2015 climate agreement. Doesn't matter, even if it brings down the entire world with it. We have the legal right under the UN system to bring that down. The same with China, which is burning most of the coal in the world, fossil fuels. China has a legal right to do this, even though the atmosphere that China is polluting above that huge territory circulates worldwide and could bring the entire world to death with it. The Earth Constitution, for the first time in history, puts governing in the hands of the sovereign people of Earth for the good of the whole and not some part. And this alone will create a decent, sustainable future for everyone. Third, the Democratic Earth Federation establishes a debt-free, interest-free planetary economy with money valued the same everywhere under Article 8.7, providing development monies for all sustainable and regenerative projects and making possible a true steady-state economy. All the structural elements causing the climate crisis and blocking solutions are transformed under this Constitution into institutions dedicated to human well-being and planetary sustainability. In the well-known book on climate change, known as The Limits to Growth by Donna Meadows and others, which was first published in 1972 and republished as The Limits to Growth, the 30-year update in 2002. The latter book details the failure of the nations of the world to heed the warnings issued in 1972. Climate collapse is now far advanced and utterly serious, it declared 20 years ago in 2002. The book updates and reissues its requirements for sustainability. They are 6. Extend the planning horizon for the world to a global planning horizon. Improve signals for monitoring the real impact of human activity. You have to monitor the entire world, planet, for environmental health. Speed up response times, prevent erosion of renewable resources, use all resources with maximum efficiency, and 6, stop the exponential expansion of population and physical capital. The actions prescribed by this book could serve as a blueprint for the features in the Earth Constitution that are designed specifically to address climate crisis. The planning time is expanded to the health of the planet as a whole. Agencies are set up to monitor the health of the whole in real time and the impact of human actions, and to respond properly for the good of the planet in the future. Programs of regeneration and renewability are set up. And this was articulated at the last session of the Prisoner World Parliament that took place in December in India. This was exactly what was done. On a practical level and a system transformation level, the Earth Constitution provides the system imperatives and infrastructure for a sustainable world. The best ecological action any group or nation or person can take is to work for ratifying the Earth Constitution. Unless human beings are unified and united as a common civilization, living in harmony with our planetary environment and its support capacities, we will not have a future on this planet. There is no sustainability without real transformation of both our spiritual condition and our national and personal egoism, and our world system structures that cater to this egoistic domination and exploitation of nature and people by the few. Palliatives put forth by timid and cowardly in the name of being practical are leading us to total disaster. Nothing short of ratification of the Earth Constitution can salvage the ecology of our planet and help ensure human survival in spite of an already severely damaged global ecosystem. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Professor Glen Martin, for a brilliant summary of the problems, but also you've given us some hope, some solutions. And if you could put into chat where people can read the Earth Constitution and sign up for it, endorse it, that would be helpful. We've got time for some questions now to Glen. He's raised, important issues, and you can tell he's a philosophy professor. Who would like to go first? Well, whilst they're thinking, let me ask a question then, if I may. Okay, so I want to put this as politely as I can. You've been promoting the Earth Constitution for the last 20 years. It's been your main thing, right? And I respect you enormously. As they do in India, I touch your feet, right? Because to me, you're a living rishi. Okay. The trouble is that it doesn't seem that the mass media, the world's bulk of intellectuals are listening. The political parties of the world. I want to help you, but I don't know how we can do it to get this out to the mass media. How can we make that breakthrough so that you're on, so that we get 1 million, 10 million, 20 million. We need 100 million people to sign the Earth Constitution. And we need to do it, like Scotland. If they go independent, everything you're saying, Nicola Sturgeon would agree with. I'm sure Morag Fairley would support that. But how do we if a government wants to sign it, what do they do? I think we need to think through the next steps. Well, tell us what your plan is.
Yeah, you may know that the Constitution was completed in 1991 after 23 years of people working on it from around the world, and we've been trying to do that, promote it as a finished document ready for ratification since 1991. It's been sent repeatedly to all the governments of the world. It's been sent to all the ambassadors in the UN. We do our best since social media has developed to get on social media and so on. But there's two things happening. One, the mainstream, the media and the mainstream, who are owned by giant private wealth corporations, systematically ignore it. It is getting out there on social media, and there is a large movement in the world. Some of you may be aware of it, with millions of people saying they're global citizens. Millions of people saying, no, I'm no longer going to be loyal to this or that religion or this or that race or this or that nation. I'm a citizen of this planet, and I want to think in terms of the planet. We're trying to appeal to these millions of people. A lot of them are young people. So we're not the only World Federalist Organization, but we're the only one that has a concrete solution, namely the Earth Constitution. We're in touch, and we're doing outreach, and we're thinking that this is an idea whose time has come. As I said in the paper, unless we really unite, this absurd war in the Ukraine, this absurd machinations behind nuclear weapons in Scotland or England, it's absurd. It's insane. We've got to clean out this mind of ours that's so full of borders and so full of divisions. I am not them, they are not me, and so on, and begin to think as human beings, as people who are the same, because we're all children of the Sunyata Buddhism, children of the Tao, children of God, however you want to express it. We've got to begin thinking as planetary citizens, living on this home that is fragile and is dying. And what the Earth Constitution does is provide a mechanism that will foster that way of thinking and embody it in concrete techniques and tools by which we can address these terrible problems, get rid of the nuclear weapons, get rid of all the weapons of war, and so on. Right? It's a mechanism for doing that. And so it is a problem, but we think there's lots in their signs that it's an idea whose time has come, and it's rapidly spreading. Our organization is rapidly growing, and more people we find on vast websites. It's happening. It's happening around the world.
Right. Well, that's what I love about you, Glen, is your indomitable optimism. You have this wonderful optimistic mind, and intellectuals need that. We have to have faith that we can make a difference. And Glen has shown this for many years of leadership. Any other questions? Now you've got a chance. Morag, did you want to comment from Scotland? You put something in chat just now. I think she recommended you reach out.
Yeah, it was to reach out to the actual climate change committee rather than the First Minister, because there's a separate committee to help tackle climate change and help towards the earth and changes and positive changes for the environment as a whole. I'd recommend reaching out to the climate change committee within the Scottish Government. Okay, well, maybe you could share in chat, you could tell Glen, the coordinates that he should contact. That'd be very helpful. And, the Scots have always been forward-thinking people. They helped invent the concept of World Federation. So I think, I think Scotland should be the first nation to endorse Glen's constitution, and then Armenia should be the second. And then we can get the ball rolling, and maybe a free Palestine and an independent Israel after they've signed a peace.
Absolutely.
They can co-sign it, Yeah. As you say, we've got to bury the axes. Sean, what's your question?
Oh, thanks very much, Thomas, and thank you, Dr. Martin. I'm really impressed with your ideas over the years, and hopefully it will take off on a massive scale. I just have one specific question, and I just thought about how we create money, and you were talking about the interest-free, but do you think Bitcoin is a movement in the right direction, because it's a creation of money, or outside the government. Is that going in the direction that you might see?
It is, but you know, Bitcoin isn't the only alternative currency. So I don't think it's a movement in the right direction in that there's lots of alternative currencies. What we need to be is united as human beings and have currency issued by the united authority of our collective sovereignty as people. And that's what the Earth Constitution does. It does not abolish alternative currencies. They're not illegal, but if there's one global currency recognized the same everywhere, it's going to stop this horrible speculation of your currency versus my currency. Well, you know, we've got to stop all this capitalistic greed for trying to make profit off of people's suffering and people's confusion. We've got a economy, and free trade is good if it's fair trade and it doesn't destroy the environment. It leads to human flourishing. The Earth Constitution provides this, and it's right there in the Constitution and in the work of the Provisional World Parliament, which you can also find online, which elaborates many of these ideas in some detail.
Yeah, I hope that, I mean, that raises another question to me, which is, what's the role of intellectuals in moving this forward? I mean, you're obviously a consummate intellectual. There are many others. Some of us in the World Intellectual Forum, some, you know, we haven't managed to reach out to. Would it not be helpful if the World Parliament, the World Constitution, had a sort of thinking committees, like one for economists, one for ecologists, one for you know, specialists in the nuclear industry, people like
absolutely
Dr. Mishra. I mean, have you got a mechanism where we intellectuals can engage and do some thinking along?
If you read the Earth Constitution, you see it relies heavily on universities and higher education, and it encourages the coordination between higher education and in the emerging World Federation government, but also in the World Parliament itself. There are three houses: House of Nations, all the nations are represented; House of Peoples are represented directly; and the House of Councillors. And in institutions of higher education around the world, there are mechanisms set up by the Constitution. I won't go into it because of time, but there are mechanisms set up to nominate people for the House of Councillors from anywhere. The people, Nelson Mandela, scientists, intellectuals, scholars of all sorts, can be nominated, and then they're democratically elected to the House of Councillors, which is supposed to be a group of people who represent the whole, the good of the whole, the intelligence of the whole. And so this idea is built right into the Constitution in many ways, from coordination with private universities and their scientists and so on, to the House of Councillors.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's good news. I think you know, so thank you again for your brilliant talk and for giving hope to so many people around the world. Now we're supposed to move on to our next speaker, Professor Eduard Muller. Is Eduard Muller on this call, please? It's Eduard Muller is an academic in Costa Rica, and he's talking to us about Costa Rica's green energy and programs. But for some reason, he seems to have not been able to join us today. So that's a shame. Maybe I'll manage to interview him on a separate, you know, and we'll stick him on the recording. Okay, so no Eduard Muller with us. Okay, well that means that we'll go on to my talk, which is the concluding talk. And Kaushala Mishra, are you there? Do you want to do the introduction thing? Professor Mishra will have to unmute.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so 1 second, please. 1 second. Hey, Anil,
Yeah, we can hear you.
1 minute. Okay, Thomas is a well-known personality and very active person in the World Intellectual Forum. हमें जरा ये स्क्रीन नहीं मिल रहा है, स्क्रीन दिला दीजिए. Yeah, fine, thank you.
You want to share screen?
No. Just let me say. Just let me say. So he is one of those who has impressed me most as a person who can put his mind almost in all subjects: science, philosophy, religion, peace, violence, many things. I think one person having attribute of these multifaceted fields is exceptional, and I admire. He is the director of International Peace Program and also Global Philosophy. He is the founder member of World Intellectual Forum and has been actively pursuing the world intellectual activity. I think he is one of those who has very original thoughts to talk about and very rational ways of analyzing a discussion, a talk. So with this brief introduction, I would like to request Thomas to kindly present his talk. Floor is yours. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mishra, and for your kind words. So my talk is called The Ukraine War, the Middle East, the Pandemic as Ecological Catastrophes. What should be done to restore peace on our planet? I want to talk from a philosophical perspective. I'm a historian as well as a philosopher. And as Dr. Mishra says, I'm a joined up thinker. I've been involved with what we call eco-philosophy for many years. In the philosophical field, people that look at environmental issues are called eco-philosophers. And I've been influenced by Professor Skolimowski, who was a pioneer of eco-philosophy. He was philosopher in residence at Dartington for many years and a friend of mine. But going further back, we come to people like Thoreau, the great American transcendentalist, who was one of the first eco-philosophers. And you could include Rousseau in that. And perhaps we go back to Spinoza, who wanted to bring in a kind of pantheism, re-sacralizing nature, because the problem with what happened at the birth of the Industrial Revolution was this idea that material nature is just there to be plundered, the resources to be garnered for our use. And this sort of, this led to capitalism. It led to the breakdown of moral safeguards. And nature lost its divinity in the West. I'm talking about here in Europe and North America. Whereas so-called primitive cultures around the world, the indigenous cultures, never lost sight of the divinity of nature. So it didn't occur to them to exploit it to such an extent that it would damage the environment. So myself and fellow eco-philosophers have been working on unraveling the roots of this problem at the philosophical level. Now, I've come to the view that the world is suffering from a pandemic of ignorance. As a philosopher, I've written books, I've taught philosophy in universities in Oxford and London. And, philosophy means the love of wisdom. We all love wisdom, everyone on this call, I'm sure. But what about ignorance? Why is there so much ignorance on the planet? Now, if you analyze, I'm a linguistic philosopher, if you analyze the word ignorance, it comes from the root to ignore. The mass of people, the mass of the people in the media, the mass of the people in government are ignoring the warning signs and have done for the last 50 years. Glen Martin said, yes, the news is all there, the information, we're giving it out, but it's being ignored by mainstream media and to some extent by mainstream academia. which is heavily invested and controlled by the military-industrial complex. So I'm arguing as a philosopher that we need to study ignorance deeply. What is ignorance? Where does it come from? So I've come up with a sort of partly sociological study of ignorance. It comes in, there's a peer pressure to be ignorant in certain institutions, not to ask difficult questions, not to rock the boat, as it said. And so we need more attention on ignorance, and we need to fight back against it. I was pleased that we were led today by a Zoroastrian, a great speaker and a great man, Homi Gandhi. It was Zoroaster that led the first call to defeat ignorance. He called it Ahriman, which is the force of evil and ignorance, and it's premised on lying. Ahriman's power comes from Druj, which is the lie. Against that, we only have Ahura Mazda, which is the force of wisdom. But so, if we're going to win this battle for planet Earth, we have to analyze Ahriman's strategy, which is promoting ignorance, promoting fear, and promoting lies. Let's get a bit wiser here and analyze this, what's going on. And this is to do with the control of knowledge. In any given society or planetary society, what is defined as knowledge at any given era is what the state or the controlling government defines as legitimate knowledge. Everything else is delegitimized. And there's a war going on, isn't there, with environmental knowledge, green thinkers. Now in Britain, which is an example of what I call an Ahrimanic state, Westminster's been taken over by the powers of Ahriman. And so the people that campaigned for the greening of Britain have now been demonized by Priti Patel, the so-called Home Minister. I call her Chief Minister for Ahriman. And they're now prevented from doing any protests. They can't do exhibitions, protests in London, or they're arrested and put in prison. Public protest in Britain is now becoming illegal. So this is one way to clamp down on the green movement. Extinction Rebellion, which was an imaginative youth-led movement to try and wake up the planet to the dangers of the environment, has now been defined as a terrorist group by the Ahrimanic Tory government, right? So, that's what we're up against. It's the control of knowledge. And to the ordinary Daily Mail reader in their comfortable little bungalow in Peacehaven or Torquay, they read the Daily Mail, oh, those greenies, they're all radicals. Yes, lock them up, because they're outside the mainstream narrative. So that's the problem we have, is who controls knowledge, who legitimizes knowledge, who empowers knowledge. I've coined a word to define what we're up against, which is Sophiaphobia. This is very, very deep. Human beings, we call ourselves arrogantly Homo sapiens, but actually we're not. We should rename it Homo ignorans. I think only about maybe a few % of us reach Homo sapiens level. Okay. How can we increase the quota of people that actually reach Homo sapiens? Okay. We have to expose the blockages. You see, I'm with Freud and Jung. There's an unconscious process at work in blocking access to wisdom. And this is what I call Sophiaphobia. It's the fear of wisdom. You see, if we really knew what's going on the planet, if we knew how close mankind has come to nuclear war several times in the last few decades, if you'd have come with me to the Faslane peace protests in Scotland and heard from experts that told how several times we've only been prevented from nuclear military catastrophe by fluke, actually. Statistically, unless we get rid of the nuclear weapons, it will happen. There will be a nuclear war. Now, if people knew this, we wouldn't be able to sleep at night. So the strategic elites, I think, rely on keeping people ignorant because they're afraid to find out. And this is what I call Sophiaphobia. It's the opposite of philosophy. It's the fear of wisdom, the fear of knowing too much. Because if you know too much, you have to have responsibility and step up. What do we do? How do we intellectuals and academics, how do we respond? Well, there's a problem with this because the mind itself has become militarized. It's very insidious. Academia has become militarized. What do I mean by that? Okay, in the old days, classical philosophy, the birth of philosophy, when the mind was just discovering itself in the times of Pythagoras, Plato, Socrates, Plotinus, and so on, there was a joined upness. Knowledge was seen as a whole, and it was a spiritual duty to serve the whole. Our duty as intellectuals was to find the one, the truth, the good, Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrians called it, and then serve that truth in whichever branch of knowledge we're working, be it the arts, literature, science. You know, Aristotle, who was the great developer of the sciences, never lost that joined upness. He never lost the knowledge that ultimately there's a oneness behind being. But unfortunately, nowadays, academia has taken the wrong path, and intellectuals have taken the wrong path, which I call the militarization of the mind. You see, the military operates by dividing people into their spheres of influence. This captain runs that regiment in that part of the battlefield. This lieutenant runs that. And everyone just stays in their silo doing their own specific little tasks. Nobody dares to step up and ask, well, is this battle the right thing? You know, they're just taught to follow orders. And unfortunately, too much of academia and even too much of scientific research and the funding that goes into science through the agencies that fund higher education has become militarized. Most of the grants that go to American universities and British universities, I don't know, probably the same in other countries, is military related. Even, I mean, back in the 60s, even things like LSD research was funded by the CIA and the military. They weren't interested in consciousness, the miracle, the wonder of consciousness. They wanted to know how you could disable enemy armies by dropping LSD on them as they were marching. You know, this is a prostitution of science. But unfortunately, it's gone a long way. That's where we've ended up. So somehow we have to demilitarize the mind collectively. And we have to reclaim control of our education systems for peace. And this is why I've worked tirelessly as a philosopher for peace. I'm co-president, you know, here in Europe, and work with Glen and other philosophers around the planet to rethink how we can demilitarize the mind. And this is why in 2000, I set up the Global Green University. I'd worked at the University of Oxford and London, but I discovered that they were hand in glove with the military. Much as I love teaching at Oxford, you know, I'd be happy to be a professor there in the comfort, but not if I'm realizing that actually, you know, a lot of its funding comes from this promotion of the enemy, fear, dominance over. You see, this is the problem with the paradigm of knowledge that we have as intellectuals. I believe we should be able and free to work for a peaceful and non-violent world. And so that's why I set up the Global Green University. It's a home for academics that want to pursue that peaceful and non-violent world. And, you know, I've been running it successfully since then. We have to get global demilitarization. That's why I support what Glen was saying. The Earth Constitution promotes that. You know, my concern is like, how do we get it to the next stage? How do we get the Earth Constitution ratified by countries like Scotland or Armenia or, you know, Palestine or Israel or whatever, or Canada? Because it should, you know, we need to move forward to that step. Okay. This is why I've been very interested also in interfaith work, because I've realized through my studies, my own academic work, that within each religion, there's respect for knowledge. Knowledge is seen as sacred, actually. I've done a commentary on the Quran, I've done a commentary on the Christian New Testament, and on the Buddhist sutras and on the Hindu Upanishads. All these texts say our purpose and function here as human beings is to attain enlightenment, some kind of, you know, theosis or enlightenment with our higher potential. In so doing, we then no longer have the wish to damage the environment or each other. It leads naturally to peace. This is what led me to set up the world's first multi-faith mediation service when I was at a conference in the Vatican with former Pope John Paul II and many religious leaders from all over the planet. And I said, where are the religious leaders doing their peace work? They issue their like separate declarations, but where's a mechanism for them to come together and solve conflicts? There isn't one. And even now it really frustrates me that, you know, the Russian patriarch Cyril can spout hate memes against the Ukrainian Christians, his fellow Christians. You know, the Pope, and they should all get together and have a theological peacemaking conference immediately, like it should have been done, because the political leaders can't do it. This is one of the problems with the hierarchical structure of political nation states as they exist at the moment, as Glenn pointed out. They're embedded with militarism and with the financial system that depends on debt and fear, you know. So I've looked to the spiritual leaders of the planet to because they should be free of all that. They should be on a higher level. But unfortunately, it turns out people like this Patriarch Cyril in Moscow was a KGB agent for 20 years. In other words, he's a fake Christian. He was just a servant of the old Soviet Stalinist state, and as was Putin. So how do we get genuine spiritual leaders back in charge? That's one of the things I think the World Intellectual Forum can help with. It was the brainchild of a great Hindu sage in India, Swami Chaturvedi, and that's where I went and met him, and we launched it together. We need the equivalent of Swami Chaturvedis from all different faiths to come together. And that's what got me interested in the Druids of Britain and Ireland, because I found it amongst them some indigenous wisdom, some you know, ancient remembrance of the primal wisdom that we all have as the planet, which was one of peace and living in harmony with nature. So yes, we need to look to our indigenous roots, both in Europe and in every other culture. One of the projects I've set up with the World Intellectual Forum, which has bearing on this, and this relates to what Homi Gandhi was saying about the apocalyptic nature of the problems we're facing on the planet. You see, all these religions, actually, a lot of them, have this notion there is an apocalypse coming. Things are going to get very bad. Christians have it in the Book of Revelations. The Muslims have it in the Quran. You know, the earth is going to melt, mountains are going to melt. Things are going to get really bad. And this was in the Zoroastrian scriptures, right in the beginning, from 1700 BC, when Zoroaster taught. You know, what he's saying, Zoroaster, is that unless we get our moral act together, we're going to destroy the planet. If, you see, Zoroaster was constantly preaching against the military thugs of his day. In those days, they just had bows and arrows and swords and axes. But, you know, now they have Stinger missiles and nuclear weapons. I mean, it's the same problem. Unless we get our moral intelligence reactivated, there's going to be serious apocalyptic problems. And that's the idea within Christianity. All the great Christian theologians have said, we have to become enlightened, follow the path of Christ, the Seishant, or, you know, we go under. Now, but there's a problem, because we have Christians, Muslims, and Jews each promoting their own path to salvation, their own vision of God. And earlier we were joined by Dr. Ian Fry in yesterday's talk, who talked about these Abrahamic faiths having a conflicting view of the route out of the apocalypse. How do we get out of it? Well, I've thought of a solution. And this is because they all promote a sort of Seishant figure or Messiah figure, a salvation route. How about we create something called the WMASC, World Messianic and Seishantic and Avatar Council? Like let the people with a roadmap out of this terrible situation we're facing come together and discuss rationally, like, you know, actually, can we pool resources? You know, there aren't that many really, really enlightened people in all the different faiths. What if we got together the most enlightened? I don't think there'd be competition between them. I don't think they would be declaring war on each other. It seems to me that the truly enlightened people are the humble ones, the ones that stay in the background, that aren't noticed. those are the enlightened ones we should be reaching out to as the World Intellectual Forum. So I created this idea of the WMASC, which is a gathering for people with a roadmap beyond the apocalypse. And I think theologically it can be done. I propose within that the idea that, I mean, Jerusalem is supposed to be the fulcrum where these religions all come together. So let's reactivate that as a good news place. Instead of constant bombings, terrorist actions, people killing each other, let's reopen the Golden Gate in the eastern wall of Jerusalem's old city. And let's, instead of having just one person who's the Messiah or the Seishad, why can't the 200 greatest spiritual elders of the planet, the Pope, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Chief Rabbi of Jerusalem, the Grand Mufti of Cairo, et cetera, you know, the four Shankacharyas of India and all South, East and West, come in all together in a procession and open the Golden Gate to awaken that collective messianic hope for mankind, instead of what we have, which is no hope, no vision, endless wars, you know, and just bombs. So I think, anyway, that's something I would like the World Intellectual Forum to do. Why do I look to spiritual leaders and not politicians? Okay, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've noticed politicians find it really hard to tell the truth. You know, planetary politicians like Glen Martin and philosophers, we love the truth, but the average political party apparatchik in every country in the world seems to make their living from lies. And we're seeing this in the Congress hearings into Trump and the horrors of the Trump campaign leading to that assault on the Capitol, which was, and the whole thing was premised on a lie spun by a pseudo-legal academic who claimed that Vice President Pence had the power to undo the election results. Watch the Congress hearings, they're gripping, they're going on right now as we speak. It's all premised on lies, you know. So I've proposed, I've thought this one through, that all politicians should have to swear an oath of veracity, that in Parliament, Congress, the Raj Sabha, all the different state assemblies around the world, they would have to swear an oath before Ahura Mazda, whatever God they believe in, Allah, you know, I don't care, the Holy Trinity, that they would only ever tell the truth. Now, people I've suggested this to, they all say, well, that would clean them all out. You'd lose all the politicians. Well, okay, we'd get a new crop. We don't want the old school politicians that can't tell the truth. We want the young ones, the sort of SNP types, people like Nicola Sturgeon, who actually love the truth, to come forward. And the Green political leaders like Caroline Lucas, who's probably one of the best of the British MPs. And I'm proud to say she's the MP for Brighton, where I grew up. So political veracity is, how are we going to solve the pandemic? Where did it come from? Again, have we been told the truth? I think it's, you know, very unlikely. I've just read a very important book by Professor, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's the son of the Robert Kennedy that was shot, who was the brother of President J.F. Kennedy. And I have a great respect for the Kennedys. Kennedy was an intellectual president, which is why he was shot, you know, as the same with Gandhi, and all genuine leaders that have a spiritual vision get, the system tries to bump them off. And the system bumped off Robert Kennedy, but his son is still going, has just written a book called The Real Anthony Fauci about how the pandemic was a spin-off from the militarization of medicine. The whole sort of military industrial medical model in which the vaccine is seen as the gold standard of healing and therapeutics, promoted by Fauci in particular, was all embedded with the American military. And I strongly recommend everyone should read that book. I'd love to invite Kennedy to speak at a future meeting of the World Intellectual Forum. He's done a sterling work in just pointing this out. You know, he doesn't go into the etiology of the pandemic so much, but the evidence seems to point that it was a produce of bioengineered research that was being done, funded a lot of it by America, but they'd offshored it to China because the Americans under Obama had clamped down on this kind of thing, gain of function research. It was too dangerous and it was illegal. So they took it to China, and then it broke loose. So, you know, this is worrying. I mean, this is World War III happening by accident as a release from a lab. And read Kennedy's work on this. What I did with the World Intellectual Forum, and I'm sort of reporting back, is during the height of the pandemic, I set up this international research commission into the etiology of the pandemic. You know, I'm neutral on the question of what kind of therapy is needed, but I think we, the planet, have the right to know the origin of this. And if this was a leak from a biological weapon, then it's an environmental and human catastrophe caused by this sort of cycle of military research getting out of hand. And so, you know, we have the right and the duty to find out, which is why I set up that commission, which is still having its hearings. I've tried to get Robert Kennedy to address us. And, you know, we'll continue until we find out the facts here. What's the solution? You know, things are grim. Okay, so what can we do? How can eco-philosophy help us out of this maelstrom? One of our speakers, who's going to be the last speaker tomorrow in our third session, is Rosalba Natero, an Italian druidess and an eco-activist. She's proposing we have a World Day for eco-spirituality, which I support 100%. She was speaking in the Italian Parliament in Rome, getting the support from senators and Italian politicians. You know, let's have a World Day for eco-spirituality. Let's celebrate two things. Firstly, our connectedness to nature, which all of us should love and respect because we come from it. And second, our spiritual natures, which we all, you know, come from. Every faith, every culture affirms that. We can interpret how you want. You can interpret it as a humanist and say it's what Marx called our species essence, this universal essence within the human being, our species essence. Or you can say it's the Atman, or you can say it's the God within, or the Tao. As Glen Martin said, it doesn't matter the name you use. So let's support this eco-spirituality day of Rosalba Natero. Another project that I'm supporting is the idea of international peace gardens around the world. I'm on the board of this. Gardens are very important for sanity, for peace. And many gardens are specifically designed as a place of peace and reflection and tranquility. I mean, after all, paradise is supposed to be a kind of a garden. So let's have peace gardens in every city, in every town. What we're doing in Europe, hopefully, is going to fund some research into the Hippocratic gardens of the ancient classical world. Hippocrates, the founder of modern medicine in the West, used medical herbs for healing. He grew a herbal garden at the temple of Asclepius on Kos. And the European Union is looking at trying to rebuild these Hippocratic gardens. And I'm part of that project. I was delighted to hear Morag saying Scottish schools are putting gardens attached to every school and showing kids, you know, where food comes from. They're doing the same in hospitals. Therapeutic gardening has been discovered to help the healing of patients. Every hospital should have a garden attached. They can grow their food, they can put the patients to go and enjoy the space, and it helps them heal. You know, nature isn't just a sort of a thing to do at weekends when you go camping. It's something we actually rely on for our lives and our survival. Glenn raised the problem of soil and the fertility of the soil. I'm a great fan of Vandana Shiva, who's pioneered this in India. The idea that permaculture, that organic agriculture is much more beneficial to the soil long term. And she's documented the negative impacts of highly industrial agricultural businesses that look at soil as something just to exploit and pour in chemicals to get a maximum yield, instead of taking a long-term view of the health of the soil. And Vandana Shiva's worked with the Soil Association in the UK to emphasize the long-term viability of the planet's ecology depends on adopting an organic farming method. And this is happening. And in fact, Vandana says that's what India used to do before Europeans turned up and taught them how to do agribusiness. So it's a question of relearning old skills. Today is quite important. Here in the Museum of the Muses, we always start the day with sort of readings and a few prayers. Today is the day that Galileo was sentenced to life imprisonment for his discoveries. So it's a symbolic day of the suppression of knowledge. And I belong to a thing called the Galileo Commission, which is saying, let's not suppress knowledge anymore. And this is about looking at the role of consciousness and spirituality within nature, within science. Because this desacralization of nature was the despiritualization of nature. It's saying, no, it's just matter. You know, we humans are the only intelligent things. No, animals, plants, the ecology as a whole shows the work of a divine intelligence, in our view. The Galileo Commission is providing solid evidence for a divine intelligence at work within nature. So I think if we go back to Aristotle's view that philosophy begins with wonder, we can get to share that wonder together. That's what science should be about, in my opinion. That's what Galileo thought, and I'm with him. I want to share something that I think is positive news. I attend a seminar occasionally from Harvard University for the Center for Intelligence Studies, because as a historian of the Cold War, obviously I've looked at intelligence. And I was very pleased a few months ago to attend a seminar soon after Biden was elected. And Biden issued a ruling to all the American intelligence agencies. One of the first things he did when he got into power was stop being interested in militarism. Stop trying to find out weaknesses in a so-called enemy. Look at planetary climate change and global warming as the biggest threat. I want all you intelligence agencies to now focus on that. That was revolutionary. And he appointed a chap to be the climate change specialist for the American government. And they had an online Zoom thing like we're doing today. And I heard an admiral who'd been in charge of the Pacific Fleet for the US talking about what's happening to the Arctic. You know, American intelligence is seriously worried about the planet and realizes that we have to change the obsession of so-called intelligence with militarism. Now, intelligence should be about peace, preventing conflict, and solving the planetary environmental problems. And this admiral was saying that all the readings they've done, the Arctic is surrounded by a polar vortex, which keeps the cold air up there, and it prevents the hot air going up to the Arctic. What's happened in the last few years is the polar vortex is vanishing. And that means that very cold air is now coming down from the Arctic and very warm air is going up. And he said this is almost irreversible. They've discovered, their scientists, that it's irreversible. So behind the scenes, American intelligence are working with Chinese intelligence to try and come up with solutions to this, because this is, you know, I mean, and this is a good sign. I'm just sharing this news because I want all the intelligence agencies of the planet, including the British, to work jointly on solving these problems of climate change. And there was a chap speaking at that conference from the British Army. He was a major general who's in charge of the British Army's response to global warming. He's looking at how the army can burn less fossil fuels, how it can be more ecologically responsible. I would say, I need to write him a letter. The best way is to prevent wars. You see, I worked with generals at a very top level. I used to be involved with Generals for Peace and Disarmament under Brigadier Harbottle. The best way as a general you can stop ecological catastrophes to prevent wars happening. So we have to retool intelligence, retool the military to be a peace-creating agency. Now that brings me back to Ukraine, because here's old Biden saying, let's not have enemies, let's use our intelligence for greening the planet. And then Putin goes and does this invasion. I mean, he seems to be reading from another script, is all I can say. And I've spent a month or two really deeply diving into Russian history, Ukrainian history. It's a catastrophe what's happened. And it's all because Putin is not an intellectual in the proper sense of the word. He's an old KGB manipulator of information as propaganda. And this goes back to my opening point about the control of knowledge. In Russia, if we were having this call in Russia, people would have come into the room by now and arrested me, and probably most of you that are on this call, because knowledge is no longer freely allowed to circulate. I am a believer in democracy, as Winston Churchill said, it's the best of all the terrible systems. But I'm a believer in intellectual democracy, that truth comes when we have dialectic, we exchange ideas, beliefs. That's why academic freedom to me is the most sacred of all the freedoms, and it's the root of them all. Because if we're not free to question and ask and challenge our leaders, our political leaders, both religious and political, then we won't, we're going to die of a truth deficit. That's what's going to destroy humanity. And from that truth deficit comes all the rest: hunger, famine, war, So Putin represents this sort of the complete opposite to what I'm talking about. And I'm deeply, deeply sad about that, because I've been to Russia. I know Russian history very deeply. I've had huge respect for Russian intellectuals over the years. I'm a fan of Russian philosophy. I've sat in the Institute of Philosophy in Moscow and met top Russian philosophers. In 1990, when Putin was just a little boy on the streets of Petersburg, but he was taking a different route to us. We were the philosophers for peace. I was elected coordinator of philosophers for peace in Moscow at that time. Putin was engineering how he can get his KGB cronies back into power long term. His fantasy about destroying Ukrainian culture is just based on his lack of education, his complete ignorance of Ukrainian culture. We have a philosophical friend on our board for the World Intellectual Forum from Ukraine. They do have their own independent history, and it's periodically been suppressed by Russia. It was suppressed by Stalin deliberately with an engineered famine called the Holodomor, which killed 3.9 million people. I mean, it's unbelievable. And the New York Times refused to cover it back in the 30s because the chief correspondent in Moscow was an alcoholic friend of Stalin, who was a really unpleasant guy, Walter Duranty. And so the news was suppressed back then. But it's too late. The cat's out the bag. This is why the Ukrainians won't let Russia reconquer them, because they know how horrible they are historically to them. And I support their freedom struggle. It's to me, it's the same as the Scots. Each culture has a right to autonomy. And Ukrainians have a right to not be Russified again. So, but I'm interested in this from the philosophical perspective. I'm ultimately, the core of all human rights, I would maintain, and this is my last point, is the right to enlightenment. We didn't come to this planet to suffer pain, poverty, hatred, anger, racism, be part of genocide. No, we came to this planet to be enlightened, to be children of God or the goddess. We're fighting in like a giant planetary Mahabharata war. We have the Krishnas available to us if we listen to them. We have the sacred texts. We can find enough enlightenment to win this one. We can go back to Zoroastria's teachings, or Abraham's, or Muhammad's, or Jesus's, or Buddha's. And that's where I think the World Intellectual Forum can help. That's why we're here. I'm teaching a class on enlightenments at the moment, because I maintain there isn't just one route to enlightenment. That's the old school. My way is the best, Christian. My way is the best, Jewish. No, my way is best, Buddhist. Or my way is the best, Muslim. No. Let's talk about enlightenments plural, because they're all valid and important ways. Let's share and pool our enlightenment resources. And then collectively, we can actualize the peace plan for the planet, which involves things like opening the Golden Gate and doing all the things that Glenn wants. You see, I maintain we can't do that till we've got the Enlightenment quotient raised. So I'm sort of like an intelligence officer for the intelligent international federation that Glenn wants to found, but it hasn't yet come into being. We have to do the work to make it possible by raising the Enlightenment quotient of the planet as a whole in order to prevent the ongoing ecological crisis and the military crisis, which are ultimately absolutely interconnected. And so I'm going to finish there. Thank you very much for listening and for participating. If there are any questions, very happy to respond. Thank you. Maybe put your hand up or just wave, you know. Sam, go for it. Nice to see you, by the way.
Thank you. No, I'm really, really very impressed and very pleased to hear you, Dr. Glen Martin, Dr. Mishra, and few others. I think we have the core of what we want to do. So I hope we get more time to talk about, one, your idea of Conference of Religious Leaders, Glen Martin's work on global constitution. And the third idea is to have this global forum on announcing Global Environmental Philosophy Day. If we take 3 or 4 action items coming out of this conversation, I think it'll be very useful in defining what we do next. It is good to have a lot of conversation, but I think we are defining next steps as well. So thank you.
I agree very much. And Sam Petroda's talking tomorrow on hyperconnectivity and the role in redesigning the world. We're looking forward to that talk in the third of our events. And you used to be involved with the Knowledge Commission for India, didn't you?
I was chairman of the National Knowledge Commission.
Yeah. I mean, I hope you'll tell us a bit about that tomorrow as well, because I'm really excited.
Lots of things to talk about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Glenn, over to you. Do unmute.
I appreciate your remarks about the right to enlightenment and the need for a work for us as intellectuals to increase the possibilities for enlightenment for the people of Earth and so on. It's our, I agree with you, it's our destiny on this planet. But I'd just like to suggest a modification of the scenario that you were talking about a moment ago, Tom, in that I don't think it's a first and then a second. It seems to me that the work for World Federation and the promotion of the Earth Constitution is in a dialectical relationship with spiritual awakening for human beings. If we talk about our unity as human beings on this planet, if we look at the specific mechanisms laid out by which we can unite in a world parliament and so on, this itself helps promote spiritual illumination. And so what I would recommend is a dialectical, not an either or, first and a second, but a dialectical mutual empowerment of both tracks of our future. The track of uniting under a specific global constitution that protects us all, and the track of thinking how, as intellectuals, we can support universal paths to illumination that are there in all these different paths that you were talking about.
That's a very good point, Glenn. Thank you. And I agree with you 100%. You know, we used to call it multi-track diplomacy back in the Cold War days. We need to approach the problem from all angles. Taking Sam's point, we also need to work out the exact steps. So that's asking you how, specifically can intellectuals support the world constitution? What next steps can we do? Let's get little working groups going on different fields, interfaith, economics, epistemology, philosophy, let's get them active, because intellectuals like to get active, come together and think. And so let's give them some jobs. Do you know what I mean? And then I think I agree 100%. It's a both and, of course. Yeah, one of the great quotes I loved was from Meister Eckhart, because people often say to me, how on earth you do everything you're doing? And there's so much to be done. I don't know where to start, Meister Eckhart said, when somebody complained he seemed to be too busy, he said, no, I'm not doing anything. God is doing all the work. And I think if enough intellectuals like us come to that place, we let that spiritual power or energy work through us, the work will get done. And it's not like I did it, my ego did it, you did it. No, God does it. We're just the instruments of that divine activity, if you want. So anyway, I just offer that as a possible thought. Sean, what's your question? You'll have to unmute.
Oh, thanks, Thomas, and thanks for such a challenging set of ideas there. I love the idea of the divinity of nature, how it's been challenged by the modern technological and scientific society. But just it's more, it's not really a question, but surely the war in Ukraine has tested us, tested our ideas, has tested Europe, and we failed. We've fallen in a lot of ways. The European Parliament, the European project has adopted a Second World War approach to the problem in Ukraine, and it could be disastrous in the very short term. And a lot of the peace people haven't come out, and they don't seem to have pushed their own ideas on the principles. Writing blank checks for one side in a conflict and then not taking the responsibility, as the Americans say, oh no, we give the Ukrainians as much weapons as they want, but how this is going to end is not our business at all. I mean, we have to challenge that sort of idea. Anyway, sorry, that's my idea.
Okay, no, that's really important question. And, as a lifelong peace activist, I've noticed this problem. I mean, I've got several answers. I'm going to do a multi-track answer to that. Firstly, I've been campaigning for the European Union to develop a mediation service, as you know, for the last 10 years. Way back in 2006, I saw a war coming between Ukraine and Russia. I had a premonition, and I don't know what you want to call this, like a druid download or something. Because it was the first time that there was threats to use the energy weapon, and Russia shut off energy supplies to Ukraine in about 2006. And I was shocked, and I had this like a shiver up my spine, thinking, oh my God, there's going to be a war between Ukraine and Russia. So I came back to Venice. I was walking around the Doge's palace as a tourist, thinking, God, this place used to run the world, There's a huge maps of every country in the world. They used to have merchants from the Caspian Sea to China to Quebec, and they're all painted on the walls of the Doge's palace. I thought, look, guys, if you could run the world, why can't you organize the peace? So I had this vision of a European mediation service based in Venice, whose job would be to prevent conflicts arising on the borders of the European Union. I wrote to everyone, the president of European Union, I wrote to the British government. I kept trying to agitate for this. But because I'm only an intellectual, quote unquote, nobody listened. I feel like, the Sibyl that's trying to warn that Troy's going to fall, and nobody listens. So I've been trying like a voice in the wilderness to get Europe to realize that peacemaking is core to the interests of the European Union. I still maintain we should do this tomorrow. We should set up a European Union mediation service, which would have the moral, legal, and technical authority to go immediately and mediate between Russia and Ukraine. It would not take sides. By law, it couldn't. It would be written into its constitution. It would go and talk to both parties 24/7. The European Union Mediation Service would be staffed by professionals, trained mediators, most of them graduates of mediation training and peace studies and so on. And they would just, like civil servants of the European Union, they would go and bore the parties to death. They would have the power to offer them money. They would say to the warring parties, please sign this peace document. We'll give you both 10 billion euros or whatever, and they would keep at it. And they would, for things like Putin, well, he needs some deep psychotherapy. And the European Union Mediation Service would have trained people that can help with that. He needs some serious healing work doing on himself because he's ended up in a very paranoid, dark place. Anyway, that's my idea. And I think that is both real. It makes sense in terms of realpolitik, but it also solves this dilemma, like, should we give weapons or should we just peace protest? No, we should do neither. We should be intelligent. As intellectuals, we should demand a European Union mediation service be set up. You and Ireland could agitate from Ireland, and it to me is logical. It's all I'm saying is we set up a doctor's surgery. You don't, if somebody's ill, dying of typhus, you call for the doctor. They treat them. You don't like politicize it and say, no, I only want the red-haired doctor or the black-haired doctor. So anyway, I hope that answers some of the question. Anyone else got any final comments? George, you've been quiet. I hope you enjoyed that.
I did. Thank you so much. Yeah, very, brilliant, and definitely, I have learned a lot. We have got to work together for sure as maybe the next step and see what could be implemented, because these issues are, touching everybody. The climate change, global warming, and of course the war in Ukraine, or the absence of intellecting, as you put it. Yeah. So all these things need, people to come together with really the right also attitude and intention for, a more peaceful and just world. Thank you so much.
Because didn't the head of the African Union go to see Putin recently and say he should start the trade again in Ukrainian grain? I mean, Africa's suffering a famine because of this war, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And because of the war, but also because sometimes we also blame everything on the war, because again, as you also put it, some politicians also don't, always tell the truth. So, things might appear worse than they are, because some of the things that we get from our own gardens are said to be more expensive because of the war in Ukraine. Of course, I mean, there could be, definitely there is also a ripple effect, because if other prices of other things go up, also they pull also the prices of the other things. But yeah, you are right that we are also experiencing actually high prices of things.
Can I ask you a question? Because I know you work in the Catholic educational sphere, and I know Morag has also got strong links to the Catholic tradition. And I know Cardinal Rinzi is a very clever man. He's done a lot of work on peace within the Catholic hierarchy. Has the Catholic Church created a sort of environmental wing? I know that Pope Francis has issued an encyclical about this. I mean, why aren't there meetings going on in the Vatican like 24/7, linking peace and environmentalism and human rights and so on? Who are the leading thinkers in the Vatican that have taken this green issue seriously and are? I don't know if Morag or George, if you can tell me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the question. Actually, as we are speaking now, there is a conference going on, which is organized by the Catholic Peace Building Network. It's based, in the United States of America, Notre Dame University, Kroc Institute.
Yeah.
And there are lots of thinkers from all over the world who are now actually discussing these issues of climate change, but conflict, and how to, build peace. And some are cardinals. From one of them is from Myanmar, and another one from Peru, I think, or Colombia. And so actually people have come from different parts, and not only Catholics. Actually, there's also a philosopher from South Africa, Muslim, and there is also an army general who is also probably he's retired now, but he's also talking about this militarization or demilitarization, and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, development, etc. So yeah, the Vatican is definitely quite involved in this, but I think that still need to do more, because I was actually wondering whether we have got some leaders today or some statesperson who could go and influence, talk to Putin, for example, and maybe advise him, probably, because now fighting is not the solution. But is there a way that somebody can talk to Putin and see how sense could be brought back to this world? So
well, thank you for sharing about that conference. That's very good news. And yes, I mean, Macron has been to see Putin. The trouble is that he's built a wall around himself of what I call pseudo or militarized intellectuals. There's a certain type of pseudo intellectual that prostitutes themselves out to a state and a military system and comes up with clever arguments why militarism is great, why we should attack so and so. And I mean, war leverages that. I mean, during World War II, British intellectuals all worked for a thing called the Ministry of Information, which was based in Senate House at the University of London, where I did my PhD. And in the wartime, all the intellectuals, the great writers, H.G. Wells, they all went and joined the government propaganda wing and poured out pamphlets why the British were the good guys. And the Germans are doing the same, the Russians are doing the same. That's why I don't like war. It simplifies things into polarization, black and white, whereas truth is always much more nuanced and more complex. As I said yesterday, the Jain idea of Anikantavada, truth is multipolar, multi-perspective. And that's why I regard myself as a Catholic. I'm a universalist who believes in the universal truth within all faiths, which is the actual definition of what a true Catholic is. But simultaneously, I'm a Protestant because I want to protest against injustice. And I would really love the Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox Church to make a peace treaty, and just realize they're just like, mirror images of each other's strengths and weaknesses. So anyway, that's another thing that we need to work on. The ecumenical. I think one of the speakers yesterday said we needed a reformation of Christianity. I think that was Ian Fry. Yeah, we absolutely do, and that needs, the reconciliation of Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, but also Gnostic strands within Christianity, which is why I'm doing my Mary Magdalene Studies Day on the 22nd of July, because I think if you go back to Christ's teachings, they were essentially a sort of Gnostic enlightenment path, similar to Buddhism, Jainism, Vedanta, and Druidry. And that's what makes them exciting and why we need them now. Anyway, unless there's any more burning questions, let's go off now and do some thinking, do some intellecting. We're coming back tomorrow for our final day. We have Sam Petroda speaking. He's the first speaker. We have Robert Keston, Marco Hren, Professor Nicholas Haggard, hopefully Dr. Swaminathan. And we have a special lecture by Professor Norman Davies of the University of Oxford, one of Britain's leading historians, a philosopher of history, a great thinker. And he'll be joining us from the UK. And Gulab Kothari is joining us as well, the editor of Rajasthan Patrika, talking about important issues. So it'll be a great day tomorrow as well. Thank you all for coming. And you know, do some good intellecting. Let's sort this problem, right? This planet needs us. Thanks to all who spoke. Yeah, from the heart.